The fluorescent lights in the Fort Campbell briefing room buzzed with a frequency that made Sergeant Nicole Hayes' skull feel like it was splitting. She'd been sitting in this plastic chair for 40 minutes while Captain Ryan Morrison questioned every aspect of her training record, her deployment history, and her current qualification status. "I'm just trying to understand, Sergeant Hayes, why you think you're qualified for this position." Morrison's tone wasn't quite hostile. It was worse. It was condescending, the vocal equivalent of patting her head while explaining why she couldn't possibly be what her record claimed. Nicole kept her hands folded on the table, her expression neutral. At 27, she'd learned that reacting to this particular brand of institutional skepticism only made it worse. Her service record sat between them. 8 years active duty, 3 combat deployments, attachment to Special Operations Forces redacted throughout, sniper qualified with specializations that remained classified. But Morrison wasn't reading the record. He was reading her. 5'6", 130 pounds, female, and therefore inherently questionable in his framework of what a precision marksman should be. "My qualification scores are in the file, sir." Nicole's voice was level, professional, giving nothing away. "Yes, I see the scores. I'm asking about the context." Morrison flipped through pages he'd clearly already reviewed multiple times. "You were attached to a task force that doesn't appear in any standard organizational charts. Your marksmanship instructor certification comes from a school that I can't verify exists. And these weapon systems you claim proficiency with, some of them aren't even in the standard Army inventory. The attachments were classified, sir. The schools were specialized. The weapons were mission-specific. Convenient." The word hung in the air between them. Nicole felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Not panic, not yet, but the precursor to it. The sense that no matter what evidence she provided, Morrison had already decided she was fabricating her credentials. "Sir, if you have concerns about my qualifications, I'm happy to demonstrate. I've scheduled you for a full requalification next week. Standard rifle and pistol, nothing exotic. We'll see how you perform when you're not." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When you're evaluated under normal circumstances, rather than whatever special arrangements you had previously. Normal circumstances." Translation. Without the classified context that explained why a female sergeant had spent 3 years doing work that most people assumed only male Tier 1 operators performed. Nicole had been through this before. After her first combat deployment, when she'd returned stateside and tried to integrate into a conventional unit. After her second deployment, when a new commander questioned why she'd been pulled for special operations work. After her medical evaluation 6 months ago, when the TBI diagnosis made everyone suddenly skeptical that her previous performance had been real. The traumatic brain injury. That was the other variable Morrison kept circling back to, though he was too careful to make it explicit. "I see you're on a medical monitoring protocol. Quarterly evaluations for ongoing symptoms." Morrison's finger traced down a page. "Migraines, visual disturbances, balance issues." "How do those affect your shooting?" "They don't, sir. My qualification scores have remained consistent." "Your qualification scores from before the injury." "I haven't seen recent data." Because the recent data was classified. Because Nicole had continued qualifying with specialized weapon systems at specialized ranges that Morrison's security clearance didn't access. But she couldn't say that without revealing information she wasn't authorized to disclose. "I've maintained all required qualifications, sir." "Required by whom?" "This mystery task force that may or may not exist." Nicole's hands tightened imperceptibly. Morrison noticed. He was watching for any sign of emotional instability, any evidence that she was as compromised as he suspected. "Sir, with respect, my security clearances have been reviewed and validated at multiple levels. If you have specific questions about my assignments, I can provide contact information for my previous commanders who have the appropriate clearances to discuss." "I've tried contacting them. Interestingly, I keep getting routed to voicemail systems or told that those personnel are unavailable for comment on classified matters." Morrison leaned back, his expression suggesting this confirmed his suspicions rather than validating Nicole's claims. "Which leaves me in a position where I'm supposed to accept on faith that you are what your redacted record implies you are." "Yes, sir. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." The bluntness seemed to surprise Morrison. He'd been expecting deference, maybe defensiveness. Not this calm assertion that his skepticism was his problem, not hers. "Sergeant Hayes, I don't know what you did or didn't do in your previous assignments. What I know is that I have a training platoon that needs an instructor who can teach fundamental marksmanship to soldiers preparing for deployment. I need someone reliable, Someone whose capabilities I can verify. Someone who isn't going to have medical episodes that compromise training effectiveness. There it was. The real objection beneath all the questions about her record. Morrison didn't want a sniper instructor with a TBI, regardless of whether that TBI affected her actual performance. My medical status is documented and cleared for duty, sir. If you want to challenge that, you'll need to go through the appropriate medical review board. I'm not challenging your medical clearance. I'm exercising my discretion as a commander to determine the best fit for my unit's needs, which meant he was going to reject her assignment regardless of her qualifications. Nicole had seen this play out enough times to recognize the pattern. Morrison would document concerns about her medical status, her unverifiable record, her attitude during this interview. He'd request a different instructor, preferably male, preferably with a conventional service history, preferably without any complications that made him uncomfortable. And unless someone higher in the chain of command intervened, Morrison would get what he wanted. Because Nicole's classified record meant she couldn't defend herself, and her TBI meant Morrison had plausible deniability for his decision. Is there anything else you need from me, sir? Morrison looked like he wanted to continue the interrogation, but he'd run out of questions that wouldn't make his bias too obvious. I'll review your file further and make my recommendation to the battalion commander. You're dismissed. Nicole stood, saluted with precision that would give Morrison no excuse to critique her military bearing, and left the briefing room. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, counting backward from 10. The fluorescent lights were murder on her migraine triggers. The stress of the interview had activated her hypervigilance. She was aware of every sound, every movement, her nervous system treating this administrative building like it was a combat zone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Major Sarah Chen, one of the few people in Nicole's chain of command who actually understood her background. How did it go with Morrison? Nicole typed her response. About as expected. He doesn't believe my record and doesn't want an instructor with a medical profile. Chen's reply came immediately. I'll talk to the battalion commander. Morrison doesn't get to veto your assignment based on personal bias. He'll frame it as legitimate concerns about reliability. Let him try. I have your actual performance data, including the classified portions. If he wants to make this a formal issue, we can bring in people who make him very uncomfortable. Nicole appreciated Chen's support, but she also knew that fighting every skeptical commander was exhausting. She'd spent 2 years doing it. Since the IED blast that gave her the TBI, since her medical evaluation and the questions that followed, since every new assignment became an opportunity for someone to question whether she was really as capable as her record suggested. The alternative was to accept medical retirement, take her disability rating, and leave the military. Dr. Patricia Morgan, her VA therapist, had suggested it multiple times. You don't have to keep fighting this battle, Morgan had said during their last session. You've served honorably. The injury you sustained was service-connected. No one would fault you for stepping away. But Nicole wasn't ready to step away. She was 27 years old. She'd spent 8 years becoming excellent at something very specific. The TBI had complicated that excellence, but it hadn't eliminated it. Her hands still remembered the muscle memory of position and breathing. Her mind still held the mathematical frameworks that transformed shooting from mechanical act to scientific discipline. What she'd lost was the luxury of being believed. The classified record that once protected her career now isolated her. Every new commander saw the redactions and the TBI and concluded she was damaged goods with an inflated sense of her own capabilities. Nicole pushed off the wall and headed toward the parking lot. She had 2 hours before her scheduled appointment with Dr. Morgan. Time enough to grab lunch and practice the coping mechanisms Morgan had taught her for managing stress-induced symptoms. As she walked, she passed a bulletin board with deployment schedules, training calendars, and a notice about an upcoming marksmanship competition. The competition was open to all qualified personnel, rifle, pistol, and a challenging long-range precision event for advanced shooters. Nicole read the details. The long-range event would be at distances up to 1,200 meters, with scoring based on accuracy and time. First place would receive recognition at the division level and potential selection for specialized training opportunities. She pulled out her phone and photographed the notice. Maybe if Morrison wouldn't accept her record on faith, she could demonstrate capability in a public setting he couldn't dismiss. Doctor. Patricia Morgan's office was deliberately calming. Soft lighting, noise-canceling panels, comfortable furniture positioned to avoid direct sunlight that could trigger Nicole's photosensitivity. Morgan was in her mid-50s, a former Army psychologist who'd transitioned to the VA specifically to work with combat veterans managing TBI and PTSD. "Tell me about the interview with Captain Morrison." Morgan settled into her chair, notepad ready but not intrusive. Nicole recounted the conversation, trying to keep her tone neutral, even though frustration bled through. He didn't say it explicitly, but the subtext was clear. He sees TBI and assumes I'm unreliable. He sees a female sergeant claiming sniper credentials and assumes I'm exaggerating. The combination makes me unacceptable for a teaching position in his unit. How did that make you feel? Nicole almost laughed. How do you think it made me feel? Angry? Frustrated? Like I'm being punished for an injury I sustained doing my job. Those are all valid feelings. What did you do with them during the interview? I maintained professional composure. I didn't give him ammunition to claim I was emotionally unstable or combative. Nicole paused. But internally, I wanted to tell him exactly what I'd accomplished, what those redacted sections of my record actually contain, what I was doing while he was pushing papers at a training command. But you couldn't. No, because the details are classified and Morrison doesn't have the clearance to hear them. Morgan made a note. This pattern, being unable to defend yourself because the evidence is classified, how often does this happen? Every time I change units. Every time there's a new commander or supervisor who reads my file and decides it doesn't make sense. They see gaps where classified operations should be. They see medical complications from an injury whose context they can't access. And they fill in those gaps with assumptions. What assumptions? Nicole had thought about this extensively. That I'm lying or exaggerating. That I had a conventional deployment experience but inflated it through connections or special treatment. That the TBI has compromised me more than I admit. That I'm a female soldier playing on diversity initiatives rather than earning credentials through actual performance. How do you know they're making these assumptions? Because of how they talk to me. The tone Morrison used today, explaining basic marksmanship principles to me as if I'm a beginner, questioning whether I understand ballistics, asking if I'm comfortable with recoil management. He wouldn't talk that way to a male sergeant with my record. That sounds frustrating. It's not just frustrating. It's exhausting. I spend more energy managing other people's skepticism than I do managing my actual symptoms. Morgan leaned forward slightly. Speaking of symptoms, how have they been this week? Nicole ran through her self-monitoring checklist. 2 migraines, both triggered by environmental factors, fluorescent lighting and loud HVAC systems. Hypervigilance has been elevated, probably due to stress about the Morrison interview. Sleep quality is poor, averaging 5 hours per night with multiple wake-ups. Visual disturbances are minimal, just occasional blurring when I'm fatigued. Are you using the coping strategies we've discussed? When I can. But some situations don't allow for accommodation. I can't ask a commanding officer to turn off overhead lights during a briefing because they trigger my migraines. I can't take breaks during evaluations to manage hypervigilance symptoms. Why not? The question stopped Nicole. Because it would validate their concerns that I'm impaired. You are impaired. You have a traumatic brain injury with documented symptoms. Acknowledging that isn't weakness, it's accuracy. In theory, yes. In practice, any accommodation I request becomes evidence that I can't perform without special treatment. And once that narrative takes hold, my career is over. Morgan was quiet for a moment, letting Nicole sit with the contradiction she'd just articulated. Nicole, what you're describing is unsustainable. You're performing at high levels while refusing accommodations that would make that performance easier. You're managing significant symptoms while pretending those symptoms don't affect you. At some point, that disconnect is going to create a crisis. What kind of crisis? Medical, psychological, professional, or all three simultaneously? Morgan's voice was gentle but firm. I've seen this pattern before. Veterans who are so determined to prove they're not compromised that they push through symptoms until they have a catastrophic episode. Then the very thing they feared, being seen as impaired, becomes impossible to deny. Nicole felt the truth of this. She'd been walking a tightrope for 2 years, maintaining the appearance of full capability while privately managing symptoms that ranged from annoying to debilitating. Every accommodation she refused, every symptom she hid, every time she forced herself to function normally when her nervous system was screaming, it all accumulated. What's the alternative? Accept limitations publicly and watch my career end. The alternative is to be honest about your limitations while demonstrating that those limitations don't prevent mission accomplishment. To show that accommodation and capability can coexist. That only works if the people evaluating me are willing to see accommodation as something other than weakness. Morrison isn't. Most commanders aren't. Then maybe the problem isn't your limitations. Maybe the problem is a system that can't process the reality of injured operators who remain highly capable. Nicole had heard variations of this from Morgan before. The therapist was careful never to tell Nicole what to do, but her perspective was clear. The military's binary approach to fitness, either fully capable or medically separated, created impossible choices for people whose conditions fell in between. "There's a marksmanship competition coming up," Nicole said, changing the subject slightly. "Long-range precision event. Public, with scoring and recognition. I'm thinking about entering." To prove yourself to Morrison? To prove myself to everyone who questions my record. If I can win a public competition, one where the performance is visible and verifiable, then maybe the skepticism stops. Or maybe the skepticism shifts to questioning how someone with a TBI can shoot at that level, which creates a different kind of doubt. Nicole hadn't considered that angle. Morgan was right. There was no performance that would satisfy every skeptic. Some people would always find reasons to question her capabilities. So what do I do? Just accept that I'll never be fully believed? You could accept that belief isn't required for you to know your own capabilities. That external validation isn't the measure of your worth or competence. It was good advice. It was also incredibly difficult to internalize when Nicole's entire career depended on other people's assessments of her capabilities. The session continued for another 30 minutes, covering Nicole's medication management, her sleep strategies, her social support network. By the end, Morgan had convinced Nicole to at least consider requesting some basic accommodations, using amber-tinted glasses to reduce fluorescent light sensitivity, taking brief breaks during long briefings to manage hypervigilance, small concessions to reality that Nicole still viewed as dangerous admissions of weakness. That evening, Nicole went to the Fort Campbell rifle range, not the main qualification range where Morrison had scheduled her retest, but the long-range facility used by specialized units. She had authorization to use the range during off hours, a privilege that came with her security clearance even if Morrison refused to acknowledge what that clearance represented. She set up her rifle, a custom Accuracy International AX338 chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum, a weapon system most conventional units never saw. The rifle was technically hers, purchased with her own money after she'd been assigned to work that required precision at distances beyond standard military sniper rifles. At 800 meters, the steel target looked tiny through her scope. Nicole settled into position, her body automatically assuming the stance that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice. Prone, left leg slightly bent for stability, right arm creating a perfect L angle, cheek weld firm against the stock. She ran through her pre-shot checklist. Wind reading from vegetation movement, 3 miles per hour from the east. Temperature, 68 degrees. Barometric pressure. She checked her Kestrel weather meter, 30.12 inches. All minor variables at this distance, but precision was the accumulation of minor variables managed perfectly. The shot broke clean. Through the scope, she watched the vapor trail, saw the impact, center mass on the steel target, the distinctive ring of bullet hitting metal echoing across the range. Nicole worked methodically through a string of shots, 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters. Each distance required different calculations, different compensations for wind and drop, and the Coriolis effect that became significant at extreme ranges. The Coriolis effect, the deflection caused by Earth's rotation, measurable at distances beyond 1,000 meters. In the northern hemisphere, bullets drifted right. The amount of drift depended on latitude and direction of fire, calculated through trigonometry that Nicole had internalized years ago. At 1,200 meters, firing east from Fort Campbell's latitude of 36.6 degrees north, the Coriolis drift was approximately 3.8 inches. Nicole adjusted her aim point, compensating not just for wind and drop, but for the rotation of the planet beneath her bullet's flight path. The shot broke. Impact, slightly right of center. She'd overcorrected the Coriolis adjustment. Second shot, refining the calculation. Impact, dead center. This was the mathematics that grounded her, the physics that didn't care about her gender or her medical status or whether Morrison believed her record. A bullet followed the laws of motion regardless of who fired it, and if Nicole could calculate those laws precisely enough, the bullet would go exactly where she intended. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger brother Marcus, who was stationed at Fort Bragg. Mom called. Said you're having problems with a new commander. You okay? Nicole smiled slightly. Marcus was 24, 3 years her junior, and protective in ways that sometimes annoyed her but mostly touched her. He'd been the one who convinced her to join the army after she'd graduated high school without clear direction. He'd been at her bedside after the IED blast, sitting vigil while she was unconscious for 3 days. He'd been her advocate during the worst of her medical evaluation, when she'd been too disoriented and exhausted to fight for herself. She typed her response. "Yeah, just the usual. New commander doesn't believe my record. We'll work it out. Want me to come up this weekend? We could talk strategy." "I'm good. Focus on your own career." Marcus was an infantry platoon sergeant with a combat deployment under his belt and a reputation as a solid leader. Nicole was proud of him, but she also worried that his protectiveness toward her might affect his own advancement. The military didn't look kindly on soldiers who caused problems defending their siblings. Offer stands. "Love you." "Love you too." Nicole pocketed her phone and returned to shooting. The sun was setting, the light changing enough that she needed to adjust her scope's illumination settings. Most people stopped shooting in diminishing light, but Nicole had been trained to operate in all conditions. Some of her most critical shots had been taken at dawn or dusk, when light levels made targeting difficult but also provided cover from observation. She thought about the competition she'd seen posted. If she entered and won, would it change Morrison's assessment? Or would he find some way to dismiss the achievement, claim the competition wasn't rigorous enough, suggest she'd had advantages other competitors didn't, imply that one public performance didn't validate her classified record? The more Nicole thought about it, the more she realized Morgan was right. There was no performance that would satisfy every skeptic. She could win every competition, ace every qualification, demonstrate perfect execution under the worst conditions, and someone would still find reasons to doubt. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to demonstrate capability not to convince skeptics but to maintain her own confidence, to prove to herself that the injury hadn't taken away the core skills she'd spent years developing. Nicole packed up her rifle as full darkness settled over the range. Her shoulder ached slightly from the recoil. The 338 Lapua was a heavy-kicking round, and even with her experience, extended shooting sessions left their mark. As she drove back to her apartment, she thought about the shot she'd never told anyone about, except the few people who'd been there. The shot that had earned her call sign, that had justified years of training, that had accomplished something most snipers considered impossible. 247 yards. Multiple high-value targets in rapid sequence. Variables that included wind, terrain, elevation, and the Coriolis effect, calculated not once but 3 times in rapid succession, and execution timed to a precision measured in seconds, not minutes. That shot had happened 18 months ago, during a deployment whose details remained classified at the highest levels. Nicole had been attached to a task force tracking senior enemy leadership in a mountainous region. The opportunity for engagement had appeared suddenly, 3 targets simultaneously visible for a window of time measured in seconds. The decision to take all 3 shots in rapid sequence had been Nicole's alone. Her spotter had questioned whether it was possible. Her mission commander had been skeptical. But Nicole had run the calculations, assessed the variables, and concluded it was achievable if she executed perfectly. And she had. 3 shots, 12.3 seconds. 3 confirmed kills at a distance that exceeded the capability of most weapon systems and the skill of most shooters. That achievement had earned her the call sign, Shadow, for the way she'd appeared in the enemy's command structure like a ghost, eliminating leadership before they knew she existed. It had also earned her a classified commendation that would never appear in her public record, a medal ceremony attended by 6 people in a secure facility, and the kind of professional reputation that existed only in communities with appropriate security clearances. To Morrison and commanders like him, none of that existed. All they saw was a female sergeant with a TBI who claimed capabilities she couldn't prove. Nicole arrived at her apartment and found a message waiting on her voicemail. Major Chen's voice. "Hayes, I talked to the battalion commander about Morrison. He's going to review your file personally, including requesting access to some of the classified sections. Morrison's recommendation will be considered, but it won't be the only factor. Call me tomorrow and we'll discuss next steps." It was something. Not a victory, but a delay of defeat. Nicole would have more time to prove herself, more opportunity to demonstrate that her TBI didn't define her limitations. She heated up leftovers, took her evening medications, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop. She pulled up ballistic calculator software and began running scenarios for the upcoming competition. If the long-range event went to 1,200 meters, what were the optimal conditions? What wind speeds would make the shots achievable but challenging? What target array would test precision without making it impossible? The mathematics calmed her. Numbers didn't question her credentials. Physics didn't care about her medical status. Ballistics didn't judge her based on gender. In this world of calculations and compensations, Nicole was exactly as capable as she'd always been. The challenge was convincing the institutional world to see what the mathematical world knew to be true. Nicole stood at the Fort Campbell qualification range at 0630, 2 hours before Captain Morrison's scheduled evaluation. She'd arrived early to run through mental preparation, the breathing exercises Dr. Morgan had taught her, the visualization techniques she'd learned from sports psychology texts, the mathematical frameworks that turned anxiety into focused calculation. The range was set up for standard rifle qualification, targets from 50 to 300 meters, nothing that would test the specialized skills Morrison claimed to doubt. This was intentional, Nicole knew. By limiting her to basic requirements, Morrison could either watch her fail, validating his skepticism, or watch her pass, which he could dismiss as adequate but not indicative of advanced capability. It was a trap, and Nicole had walked into it because refusing the requalification would have been seen as admission that she couldn't meet standards. Major Chen arrived at 0700, earlier than her official observer role required. "You don't have to do this," Chen said without preamble. "I can escalate this to the battalion commander. Make the case that Morrison is creating hostile conditions based on bias rather than legitimate concerns. And then what? Morrison gets reprimanded, I get assigned to his unit anyway, and we spend the next year in a dysfunctional command relationship where he resents my presence and documents every minor issue as evidence he was right to question me." Chen's expression tightened because she knew Nicole was correct. Winning the battle of assignment wouldn't solve the underlying problem. "So you're going to shoot, pass Morrison's test, and hope he accepts the evidence in front of him? I'm going to shoot because refusing would confirm everything he suspects. Whether he accepts the evidence is his problem." At 0730, Morrison arrived with 2 other officers Nicole didn't recognize, likely additional observers to ensure the evaluation was properly documented. The setup felt like a court-martial rather than a routine qualification. "Sergeant Hayes." Morrison's tone was professionally neutral, which somehow felt worse than open hostility. "You'll complete the standard rifle qualification course, 40 targets at distances from 50 to 300 meters. You need to hit 37 to pass. Any questions?" "No, sir. Your medical profile indicates photosensitivity. If the lighting conditions become a problem, let me know and we can reschedule." It sounded like accommodation, but Nicole heard the subtext. "Give me a reason to document that your symptoms prevent qualification, and I'll use it to justify removing you from consideration." "The lighting is fine, sir." Nicole moved to the firing line and settled into position. The M4 carbine felt wrong after years working with precision rifles, shorter, lighter, designed for close quarters rather than extreme distance. But muscle memory was muscle memory, and her fundamentals remained solid despite the unfamiliar platform. The first target appeared at 50 meters. Nicole acquired, aimed, fired. Impact, center mass. The sequence repeated. Targets at various distances, various positions, prone, kneeling, standing, various time limits. Nicole's hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Her mind ran the simple mathematics of close-range shooting. Minimal wind drift, minimal drop, point-aim accuracy rather than sophisticated ballistic calculations. It was boring. After years of making shots that required accounting for Earth's rotation and atmospheric pressure at molecular levels, this felt like remedial training. But Nicole maintained focus because the cost of complacency was Morrison finding some minor flaw to amplify. At target 35, something shifted. Nicole felt the familiar warning signs of a migraine, the slight blurring at the edges of her vision, the increased sensitivity to light, the way sound seemed to sharpen and become painful. Not now. She had 5 more targets, 5 more hits to secure a passing score and deprive Morrison of his easiest argument against her. Nicole forced her breathing into the rhythm that sometimes prevented full migraine onset. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth, the pattern that slowed her heart rate, that told her nervous system to stand down from the stress response triggering the symptoms. Target 36 appeared. Nicole's vision blurred further, the target's edges losing definition. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her sight. Focus. Mathematics. Wind negligible. Distance 200 meters. Drop minimal. Center mass. The shot broke. Through her compromised vision, she couldn't tell if it hit center or edge. The target dropped. A hit, but she didn't know how good. Target 37. Her head was pounding now. The migraine fully established. Sound was painful. The crack of her own gunfire felt like ice picks through her skull. The target swam in her vision. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, counted backward from 10, opened them and forced her eyes to focus through the pain. The shot broke. Target dropped. 37 hits. Minimum passing score achieved. Nicole cleared her weapon and stood, keeping her movements controlled despite the migraine that wanted her to curl up in a dark room. Morrison approached, tablet in hand, showing the scoring results. 37 out of 40. Passing, but not impressive. He made notes on his tablet. I noticed some difficulty toward the end. Were you experiencing symptoms? Here was the trap's spring. If Nicole admitted the migraine, Morrison would document that her medical condition compromised her performance. If she denied it, she'd look dishonest or unaware of her own limitations. I experienced some photosensitivity toward the end of the qualification, sir. I managed it through breathing techniques and maintained qualification standards. Managed it, but you were affected. The standards don't require perfect conditions, sir. They require performance within acceptable parameters regardless of conditions, which I delivered. Morrison's jaw tightened slightly. He'd wanted either complete failure or an admission of impairment significant enough to question her reliability. Instead, he got minimum passing performance with acknowledgement of symptoms she'd managed effectively. I'll include this evaluation in my overall assessment. Morrison's tone suggested this wouldn't weigh in Nicole's favor. Major Chen, do you have any questions for Sergeant Hayes? Chen had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed frustration. No questions, sir. I'd note for the record that Sergeant Hayes passed qualification while managing documented medical symptoms, which actually demonstrates resilience and capability rather than limitation. Your opinion is noted. Morrison turned to Nicole. You're dismissed, Sergeant. Nicole saluted and walked toward her vehicle, her head pounding with each step. She managed to get in the driver's seat before the full force of the migraine hit, the kind of pain that made thinking difficult, that turned light into agony, that required medication, and hours in a dark room to manage. She couldn't drive like this. She pulled out her phone and texted Chen. Migraine fully triggered. Can't drive safely. Need 30 minutes to medicate and stabilize before leaving. Chen's response came immediately. Stay put. I'm coming to you. 10 minutes later, Chen appeared with a bottle of water and a portable sunshade that she rigged over Nicole's windshield. Take your meds. Close your eyes. I'll make sure Morrison doesn't document this as a medical emergency requiring intervention. Nicole swallowed the medication, closed her eyes, and tried to breathe through the pain. She was aware of Chen standing guard outside her vehicle, creating a barrier between Nicole's visible impairment and Morrison's documentation. After 20 minutes, the medication began to take the edge off. Nicole could think again, could open her eyes without feeling like the sunlight was drilling into her brain. Better? Chen asked. Functional. I can drive now. That was handled well back there. Morrison tried to set you up for failure and you didn't give him anything definitive. But Nicole... Chen's voice shifted from professional to personal. You can't keep doing this. Pushing through symptoms that would hospitalize most people. Refusing accommodations that would make this easier. Performing while you're barely holding it together. It's not sustainable. It's what's required. No, it's what you think is required because you're operating in a system that punishes any admission of limitation. But there's a difference between limitation and impairment. You have a TBI. That's a fact. It causes symptoms. Also a fact. Neither of those facts means you can't perform your job. They just mean you need some accommodation to perform optimally. Nicole wanted to argue, but the migraine had taken her fighting energy. Morrison will use any accommodation as evidence I'm compromised. Then Morrison is wrong and we document his wrongness. But you destroying yourself to prove him wrong isn't a victory. It's self-sacrifice for someone who doesn't deserve it. Chen's words echoed Dr. Morgan's assessment from their last session. The same concern, the same warning that Nicole's approach was unsustainable. I'll think about it, Nicole said, which was the closest she could come to agreeing when her head was splitting and her energy was depleted. 3 days later, Nicole submitted her entry form for the Fort Campbell marksmanship competition. The long-range precision event was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which gave her time to prepare and for her migraine cycle to stabilize. She didn't tell Morrison she was entering. Didn't want to give him the opportunity to create barriers or suggest that competition results wouldn't be considered as evidence of capability. Better to win first, present the achievement second. Nicole spent every evening at the long-range facility, working through scenarios that might appear in the competition. The event details were deliberately vague, challenging long-range precision shooting for advanced marksmen, which meant she had to prepare for multiple possibilities. On the fourth evening, Nicole found she wasn't alone on the range. A soldier she didn't recognize was setting up an unfamiliar rifle system at the 800-meter line. "You're Sergeant Hayes." It was a statement, not a question. The soldier was male, probably early 30s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent significant time in operational units. "I am Sergeant First Class David Torres. I'm entering the long-range event, too." He gestured at his rifle. "Custom 300 Norma Magnum. Figured I'd get some practice in before the competition." Nicole recognized the rifle system. High-end precision platform used by some special operations units. Torres clearly had access to equipment beyond standard Army inventory. "Nice setup," she said, keeping her tone neutral. She didn't know Torres, didn't know if he was another Morrison, someone who'd question her credentials, or someone who understood the classified world she'd operated in. "Heard you're the one who shoots 338 Lapua here after hours." Torres settled into position. "Also heard you have a TBI and some people think that makes you unsafe with a rifle." Nicole's guard went up immediately. "You heard a lot. Fort Campbell is a small community. Word gets around." Torres made a show of adjusting his scope. "For what it's worth, I knew someone who worked with a sniper called Shadow. Female operator attached to a task force doing work most people don't know exists. Made shots that shouldn't be possible. Sustained a TBI from an IED but kept operating for 3 months after before anyone realized how severe the injury was." Nicole's pulse quickened. Torres knew. Not specifics. He probably didn't have clearance for operational details, but he knew enough to understand that her redacted record wasn't fabrication. "That operator sounds impressive," Nicole said carefully. "She is." Torres glanced at Nicole. "The person who told me about her said she made a shot at a distance that required calculating for Earth's rotation. 3 targets in rapid sequence. Execution so precise that mission planners who'd said it was impossible had to recalibrate their understanding of what's achievable." Nicole didn't respond. Confirming or denying would violate operational security, even if Torres had clearly pieced together information he shouldn't have access to. "Anyway," Torres continued, "I figured if that operator was real, and I believe she is, then she'd probably be dealing with a lot of skepticism from people who can't verify her record. Might be nice for her to know that some people believe the record without needing verification." He took his shot. Impact, solid center mass at 800 meters. "Good shooting," Nicole said quietly. "Thanks. You should take a few rounds. I'd be interested to see what someone with your reputation can do." Nicole settled into position beside Torres, her 338 Lapua familiar and comfortable. At 1,000 meters, she ran through her calculations automatically. Wind 2 miles per hour from the west, temperature dropping to 64 degrees as the sun set, barometric pressure stable. The shot broke clean. Impact, center mass. "Solid," Torres commented. "Most shooters I know can't maintain that consistency at 1,000 meters, especially not with a TBI that causes tremors and visual disturbances." "How do you know about my medical profile?" "Same way I know about Shadow. People talk, and some of us are paying attention to who the institution tries to push out." Torres took another shot. "There's a movement, if you want to call it that. Operators who've been injured but remain highly capable. We're trying to change how the military thinks about medical retention. Prove that injury and excellence can coexist. How's that going?" "Slowly. Institutional change always does." Torres packed up his rifle. "Competition is in 2 weeks. I'll be there. Be interesting to see how you do when your performance is public and undeniable." "You think winning a competition will change Morrison's assessment?" "No, but it might give you ammunition to go over Morrison's head. Hard to deny capability when it's demonstrated in front of witnesses." Torres paused. "Also, between you and me, Morrison is being watched. There are people higher in the chain who know what you've actually done. They're letting him make his case, but if he overreaches, he's going to find himself in a very uncomfortable conversation." Nicole absorbed this. It aligned with what Major Chen had said about the battalion commander reviewing her file, but Torres seemed to have information beyond what Chen had shared. "Who are you, really?" Nicole asked. "Someone who was in the wrong place when an IED detonated. Lost hearing in my left ear, sustained a TBI similar to yours, Spent 6 months fighting to stay in service. I won that fight, but barely. Now I'm trying to make it easier for the next person. Torres handed Nicole a card with contact information. If you need support, someone who understands what you're dealing with, reach out. There's a whole network of us. After Torres left, Nicole stood alone on the darkening range. The idea that there was a network of injured operators fighting similar battles was both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because she wasn't alone. Disturbing because it meant the problem was systemic rather than isolated to her specific situation. She fired 10 more rounds, working through her pre-competition preparation systematically. Each shot was a data point: wind reading accuracy, drop compensation, trigger control, position stability. The mathematics that grounded her when everything else felt uncertain. Colonel James Hartwell's office was deliberately intimidating. Walls covered with unit patches from 30 years of service. Photos of Hartwell with various senior military and civilian leaders. A desk that looked like it had seen multiple wars. This was a commander who'd earned his position through competence and combat leadership, not political maneuvering. Nicole stood at attention, acutely aware that this meeting would likely determine whether Morrison's recommendation to reject her assignment would stand or be overruled. Sergeant Hayes, at ease. Hartwell gestured to a chair. I've been reviewing your file. The unclassified portions and, with appropriate clearances, some of the classified sections that Captain Morrison doesn't have access to. Nicole sat, keeping her posture perfect despite the anxiety that made her want to fidget. I'm going to be direct, Hartwell continued. Morrison submitted a recommendation to assign a different instructor to his training platoon. His stated reasons are concerns about your medical reliability and unverifiable service record. After reviewing your complete file, I find his concerns to be unfounded and likely based on bias rather than evidence. Nicole felt something release in her chest. Not quite relief, but a lessening of the constant tension she'd carried since the Morrison interview. However, Hartwell said, and Nicole braced for the complication she'd been expecting. I'm also concerned about the pattern I'm seeing in your recent service. Multiple conflicts with commanding officers who question your credentials. Multiple instances of you pushing through medical symptoms rather than requesting reasonable accommodation. A general approach that suggests you're trying to prove you're unimpaired rather than demonstrating how to be effective despite impairment. Sir, with respect, requesting accommodation in the current environment is often interpreted as proof of impairment rather than reasonable adjustment. I know, and that's a failure of leadership at multiple levels. Hartwell leaned back. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm assigning you to Morrison's unit as planned. But I'm also assigning Major Chen as your direct supervisor for all training activities. Morrison will have administrative authority, but Chen will evaluate your performance and provide guidance on accommodation requests. It was a split-the-baby solution, giving Morrison the assignment he'd tried to reject while removing his ability to sabotage Nicole's work. Additionally, Hartwell continued, I'm aware you've entered the marksmanship competition. I'll be attending as an observer. I want to see your capabilities demonstrated in a public setting. Not because I doubt your record. I've seen enough classified material to know you're exactly as skilled as your file suggests, but because I want other commanders to see it. Public demonstration of capability is harder to dismiss than classified operations they can't verify. Understood, sir. Major Chen tells me you're managing a TBI with symptoms that can be significant. I want you to know that documenting those symptoms and requesting accommodation isn't weakness. It's intelligent management of a service-connected condition. If you need adjusted lighting, if you need breaks during long briefings, if you need flexibility in scheduling to manage migraine cycles, those are reasonable requests that don't undermine your professional competence. Nicole had heard similar statements from Dr. Morgan and Major Chen. Hearing it from a battalion commander, someone with actual authority to enforce accommodation without professional penalty, made it feel more real. I'll consider that, sir. Don't just consider it, do it. Because what you're doing now, hiding symptoms, refusing accommodation, performing while significantly impaired, that's not sustainable. And when it breaks down, Morrison will use that breakdown as retroactive justification for his skepticism. Hartwell pulled up something on his computer. I've read the mission debrief from November 2023, the operation in the mountain region, the shot you made at 2,247 yards. Nicole's breath caught. That mission was classified at the highest levels. The fact that Hartwell had access meant he was cleared for information beyond standard battalion command. That shot, Hartwell continued, required accounting for variables most shooters never encounter: wind at multiple altitudes, temperature gradients, barometric pressure changes, and the Coriolis effect calculated 3 times in rapid sequence for 3 different target locations. The mission planners said it was impossible. You proved them wrong. I had excellent intelligence support, sir, and optimal environmental conditions. You had 12 seconds to execute 3 shots that each individually would have been considered career-defining achievements. That's not luck. That's not optimal conditions. That's mastery of your craft at a level few people ever reach. Nicole didn't know how to respond. She'd spent 2 years having that achievement dismissed or questioned. Hearing it acknowledged by someone with the clearance to know what actually happened felt surreal. The injury you sustained 3 months later, the IED blast that gave you the TBI, that happened while you were providing overwatch for a direct action mission. You continued to operate for 90 minutes after the blast, completing your assigned role before reporting symptoms. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. Why did you wait to report symptoms? Nicole had been asked this question during her medical evaluation. She'd given the officially acceptable answer then, that she hadn't recognized the severity of her injury in the moment. But Hartwell's expression suggested he wanted the real answer. Because reporting symptoms during an active mission would have meant extraction. Extraction would have meant the mission lost its precision fire asset. I assessed the symptoms as manageable and the mission as critical. And in retrospect? In retrospect, I should have reported immediately. The delay in treatment contributed to the severity of my long-term symptoms. But in the moment, with the information I had, I made the choice I believed was correct. Hartwell nodded slowly. That's the kind of decision-making that makes you an exceptional operator. It's also the kind of decision-making that gets people hurt. The question the military faces is whether we want operators who make those choices, prioritizing mission over personal well-being, or whether we want to create systems that prevent those choices. I don't think you can have it both ways, sir. Neither do I. Which is why your case matters. You represent the consequence of asking operators to prioritize mission accomplishment. Sometimes they get injured doing it. Then we face a choice: honor that sacrifice by retaining them despite injury, or discard them because injury makes us uncomfortable. Hartwell stood, indicating the meeting was ending. I'm retaining you, Sergeant Hayes, not despite your injury, but acknowledging that your injury is the cost of exceptional service. Morrison will be informed that his recommendation has been rejected. If he creates a hostile work environment, I want you to document it and report to Major Chen immediately. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just do your job. Teach Morrison's soldiers how to shoot, and for God's sake, request the accommodations you need to do it effectively. Nicole left Hartwell's office feeling lighter than she had in months. Not vindicated, Morrison would still resent her presence, would still look for evidence to justify his initial skepticism, but protected in ways she hadn't been before. Her phone buzzed immediately. A text from Major Chen. Heard you met with Hartwell. Call me. Nicole called from the parking lot. Hartwell came through, Chen said without preamble. You're officially assigned to Morrison's unit with me as your direct supervisor for training activities. Morrison is not happy, but he's smart enough not to make his unhappiness a formal issue. What does that mean practically? It means he'll be professionally correct but cold.
He'll follow the letter of regulations while finding subtle ways to make your job harder. Your best response is to be excellent, undeniably publicly excellent, so that any complaints he makes sound like sour grapes rather than legitimate concerns. That's what the competition is for. Exactly. Win that, and you establish capability in a context Morrison can't dismiss. Chen paused. How are you feeling about it? Confident in my skills, anxious about my symptoms.
Standard operational anxiety. Have you talked to Dr. Morgan about anxiety management strategies? We're working on it. She wants me to try medication, but I'm resistant because I worry it will affect my shooting. Talk to her about that specifically. There might be options that manage anxiety without compromising fine motor control or cognitive function. Chen's tone shifted. Nicole, I need you to understand something. You've been in survival mode for 2 years, fighting to stay in service, fighting to prove your capabilities, fighting to manage symptoms while hiding their severity. That's exhausting and unsustainable. Now you have some breathing room. Hartwell has your back. I'm your direct supervisor. Morrison can't unilaterally dismiss you. Use that breathing room to actually take care of yourself. I'll try. Don't try. Do. Because the next crisis is coming. It always does. And you need to be in a position to handle it from a place of strength rather than depletion. That evening, Nicole called the number on the card Torres had given her. A woman answered after 2 rings. "Torres said you might call. This is Captain Lisa Santos. I coordinate the informal network of injured operators Torres mentioned." "What exactly is this network? Support system, advocacy group, information sharing collective, depends on what you need. We're soldiers who've sustained combat injuries, but remain capable of serving. We help each other navigate medical retention processes, share strategies for symptom management, and advocate for policy changes that acknowledge injury and capability can coexist." Nicole settled into her apartment couch, suddenly aware of how isolated she'd been. How many people are in the network? Officially, nobody, because it's not an official organization. Unofficially, about 200 operators across all branches: TBIs, amputations, chronic pain conditions, PTSD, anything that creates a gap between injured and incapable that the military's binary fitness standards don't know how to process. How did it start? About 5 years ago, a Special Forces sergeant with a below-knee amputation was fighting medical retirement. He'd developed prosthetics and techniques that let him perform at his previous level, but the medical board kept insisting that amputation meant automatic disqualification from operational roles. He started connecting with other injured operators, sharing strategies, building a database of successful retention cases. It grew from there. What happened to him? He won his retention battle. Then he got promoted to sergeant major and became one of our senior advocates in the policy space. Turns out having someone at that level who understands the issues firsthand makes a huge difference. Nicole thought about Torres, about Hartwell's comments that people higher in the chain were watching her case. Is Hartwell part of this? Can't confirm or deny who's involved at senior levels. But let's say there are commanders who understand that the military's approach to injured operators is both morally wrong and strategically stupid. We're losing decades of expertise and operational knowledge because we can't accommodate people whose only failing is sustaining injuries while doing their jobs. What do you need from me? Right now? Nothing. You're fighting your own battle. But when you're through it, and you will get through it, maybe you help the next person. Share what you learned. Advocate for policy changes. Build the network stronger. Santos paused. I've read your file. Obviously, I don't have access to the classified sections, but I know enough to understand you're dealing with something most operators never face, trying to validate a record that can't be publicly proven while managing an injury that makes people question whether you could have done what your record claims. That's accurate. Torres also told me about the competition you entered. That's good strategy. Public demonstration that's harder to dismiss. But be aware that some people will find ways to dismiss it anyway. They'll say the conditions weren't realistic enough, or that one good performance doesn't validate years of claimed service, or that you must have gotten lucky. I know. Major Chen said the same thing. The point isn't to convince everyone. The point is to build enough evidence that reasonable people can't dismiss you without revealing their bias. Morrison isn't reasonable. He's already decided you're not what your record claims. But Hartwell is reasonable, and there are others in the chain of command who are paying attention. They talked for another 20 minutes. Santos sharing insights about effective documentation strategies, warning signs that a commander was building a case for separation, resources available through the network for legal support or medical advocacy. By the end of the call, Nicole felt less alone. The isolation she'd experienced for 2 years, the sense that she was the only one fighting this particular battle, had lifted slightly. There were others. They'd faced similar struggles. Some had won, some had lost, but none of them thought Nicole's fight was unusual or her capabilities questionable. After hanging up, Nicole made a list of accommodation requests she'd been avoiding: amber-tinted glasses to reduce fluorescent light sensitivity, ability to take 10-minute breaks during briefings longer than 90 minutes to manage hypervigilance, flexible scheduling for medical appointments without requiring advance notice when migraines strike unpredictably, access to quieter workspace during administrative tasks when sensory overload is triggering symptoms, small adjustments, reasonable accommodations, things that wouldn't compromise her work, but would make managing symptoms less exhausting. She'd submit them tomorrow through Major Chen, not because she'd stopped fearing they'd be used as evidence of impairment, but because Colonel Hartwell had made it clear that refusing accommodation was more problematic than requesting it. Nicole pulled up the competition registration confirmation. 2 weeks until the event. 2 weeks to prepare, to manage her symptoms, to be ready for the public demonstration that might finally shift the narrative from questionable claims to undeniable capability. She opened her ballistic calculator and began running scenarios. If the competition included shots beyond 1,000 meters, the Coriolis effect would be significant. At Fort Campbell's latitude, firing in different directions would create different drift patterns. East, rightward drift. West, leftward drift. North, minimal drift. South, maximum drift. The mathematics that grounded her. The physics that didn't care about institutional bias or medical skepticism. The calculations that transformed shooting from mechanical act to scientific discipline. This was where Nicole felt competent, where injury didn't matter because the numbers remained the same regardless of her neurological function, where she could prove, mathematically and practically, that she was exactly as capable as her record claimed. Nicole reported to Morrison's training platoon at Oro 700 on a Monday morning. The platoon consisted of 40 soldiers preparing for deployment, mixed experience levels, various military occupational specialties, all requiring basic rifle marksmanship qualification before they could ship overseas. Morrison's welcome was professionally cold. Sergeant Hayes will be your primary marksmanship instructor. Major Chen will supervise training activities. I expect all soldiers to meet qualification standards before deployment timeline. Questions? No one had questions. Morrison dismissed everyone except Nicole and Chen. The training schedule is posted, Morrison said, handing Nicole a packet. You'll conduct range instruction 3 days per week, classroom instruction 2 days per week. Any accommodation requests go through Major Chen, who will determine if they're reasonable or indicate inability to perform duties. It was a trap, making Chen the gatekeeper for accommodations while suggesting that any accommodation Nicole requested might be evidence of impairment. But Chen's expression showed she recognized the game Morrison was playing. Actually, sir, accommodation requests are evaluated based on whether they enable performance, not whether they indicate limitations. Sergeant Hayes has already submitted several reasonable requests that I've approved. Chen pulled out her tablet. She'll be using amber-tinted glasses to reduce photosensitivity, taking brief breaks during extended briefings to manage hypervigilance, and maintaining flexible scheduling for medical appointments. None of these accommodations affect her ability to conduct training. They enhance it by allowing her to manage symptoms proactively. Morrison's jaw tightened. As long as training standards are met, they will be. Sergeant Hayes has a track record of exceeding standards, not merely meeting them. After Morrison left, Chen turned to Nicole. He's going to look for every minor issue to document. Your best defense is to be excellent with witnesses. Make sure soldiers understand you're competent. Make sure their performance improves measurably, and document everything. Nicole spent the first day observing the platoon's current skill levels. Most soldiers were adequate. They could hit targets at close range, understood basic safety protocols, followed instructions competently. But their fundamentals were weak. Improper breathing control, inconsistent sight picture, poor trigger discipline. She could fix this. Teaching fundamentals was straightforward, didn't require discussing her classified background, and provided clear metrics of improvement that even Morrison couldn't dismiss. At the end of the day, one of the younger soldiers, a specialist named Rodriguez, approached Nicole hesitantly. Sergeant Hayes, can I ask something that might be inappropriate? Ask. I heard you have a TBI from combat, and I heard you're still one of the best shooters in the Army. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. My brother has a TBI from a car accident. He thinks his life is over, that he can't do anything he used to do. I want to show him that brain injury doesn't mean everything stops. Would you be okay with me telling him about you? Nicole considered this. She'd spent 2 years trying to hide her TBI, treating it as a vulnerability to be concealed. But Rodriguez was asking her to be visible precisely because of the injury, not despite it. Your brother should know that TBI is different for everyone. My symptoms, my capabilities, my recovery path, none of that predicts what his will be. I know, but seeing someone who has a TBI and is still serving, still doing their job at a high level, that might give him hope that his life isn't over. Then yes, you can tell him about me, but be accurate. I have symptoms that are significant. I manage them through medication, therapy, and accommodations. I'm not recovered. I'm adapted. There's a difference. Rodriguez's face lit up. Thank you, Sergeant. This is going to mean a lot to him. After Rodriguez left, Nicole realized that being visible about her injury might be more powerful than hiding it, not because it made her seem weaker, but because it demonstrated that injury and capability could coexist. That adaptation was a skill, not a failure. That evening, Nicole had her weekly session with Dr. Morgan. "How was your first day with Morrison's unit?" "Better than expected." Morrison was cold but professional. The soldiers seemed receptive. And something unexpected happened. A soldier asked if he could tell his brother about my TBI because his brother needs to see that brain injury doesn't end everything. Morgan leaned forward with interest. "How did that feel?" "Strange. I've spent so long hiding the injury, treating it as something to be ashamed of. Having someone ask to use me as an example of capability despite injury, it shifted something." "What did it shift?" Nicole thought about this. "Maybe it shifted my understanding of what strength looks like. I thought strength was pretending I wasn't injured, performing as if the TBI didn't exist. But Rodriguez wanted to see the injury and the capability together, as if managing symptoms while maintaining performance is itself impressive. It is impressive. Most people with your level of TBI symptoms would be on disability, not teaching marksmanship to deploying soldiers." Morgan made a note. "This is progress, Nicole. You're starting to integrate your injury into your identity rather than treating it as a shameful secret. I'm still worried Morrison will use any visibility of my symptoms against me. He might try, but Hartwell's support and Chen's supervision create a buffer. Morrison can document his observations, but he can't act on them unilaterally." They spent the rest of the session discussing Nicole's upcoming competition and her anxiety about public performance. Morgan taught her additional breathing techniques, visualization strategies, and ways to manage the performance anxiety that could trigger her symptoms. "One more thing," Morgan said as the session ended. "You mentioned Colonel Hartwell told you about reading the mission debrief from the shot that earned you your call sign." "Yes, the 2,247-yard triple engagement. How did it feel to have that acknowledged by someone with authority?" "Validating, but also strange. I've been operating as if that achievement doesn't exist because I can't talk about it. Hearing Hartwell reference it directly made it real again." "Real in what way?" "Real in the sense that it happened, that I did something extraordinary, that my classified record isn't fabrication or exaggeration. It's documentation of capabilities most people think are impossible. And you are that person, not were, are. The injury changed your baseline, but it didn't eliminate your core capabilities." Nicole nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The TBI had taken something from her. Not all her skills, but the effortless execution she'd once possessed. Now everything required more concentration, more compensation, more deliberate management. But maybe, as Morgan suggested, that was still excellence. Just a different kind. The Fort Campbell marksmanship competition drew competitors from across the installation. Infantry soldiers testing their combat skills, military police officers maintaining proficiency, and a handful of specialized personnel whose presence suggested they had access to training and equipment beyond standard Army issue. Nicole arrived at the range at 600, 3 hours before the long-range precision event began. She needed time to set up her rifle, check environmental conditions, and run through her mental preparation without the pressure of other competitors watching. The range was configured for shots from 600 to 1,200 meters, 6 steel targets at varying distances, with scoring based on both accuracy and time. Competitors would have 5 minutes to engage all 6 targets, with points deducted for misses and bonus points awarded for center mass hits. Nicole studied the terrain. The range ran roughly east to west, which meant the Coriolis effect would create rightward drift for targets to the east, leftward drift for targets to the west. At 1,200 meters, that drift would be approximately 4 inches, significant enough to miss if not compensated for. She pulled out her Kestrel weather meter and began documenting conditions. Temperature 59 degrees, barometric pressure 30.08 inches, wind variable between 2 and 5 miles per hour from the north. All of this would change as the sun rose and heated the air, creating thermal currents that would shift wind patterns. At 0700, other competitors began arriving. Nicole recognized Torres immediately. He'd entered as promised. She also recognized several soldiers from Morrison's unit who'd signed up for the standard rifle events, and a handful of officers, including Colonel Hartwell and Major Chen. Morrison was notably absent. "Nervous?" Torres asked, setting up his rifle 2 lanes over from Nicole's position. "Focused." "Good answer. I've seen the target array. That 1,200-meter shot to the east is going to catch people who don't account for Coriolis. Most competitors won't even think about it. But you will. Of course, and so will you, which is why this is going to come down to execution under pressure rather than technical knowledge." At 0830, the range safety officer called all long-range competitors to a briefing. 12 people total, a small field for a specialized event. The safety officer explained the rules, the scoring system, and the time limits. Then added, "This event is being observed by senior leadership from division level. Your performance will be evaluated not just for competition purposes, but as a demonstration of Fort Campbell's marksmanship capabilities." Nicole felt the weight of that statement. This wasn't just a competition anymore. It was a demonstration for evaluators who would make judgments about training effectiveness, resource allocation, and personnel capabilities. The first competitor shot at 0900, a staff sergeant from 101st Airborne, competent but not exceptional. He engaged all 6 targets in 4 minutes, with 4 solid hits and 2 marginal impacts. Respectable performance that established the baseline. The second and third competitors followed similar patterns. Competent shooting that hit most targets, but didn't demonstrate the precision Nicole knew was possible at these distances. Torres shot fourth. He was methodical, taking time to read wind between each shot, adjusting his position deliberately. All 6 targets engaged in 4 minutes 30 seconds. 5 center mass hits, 1 edge hit. It was the best performance so far, and the crowd of observers, now including more senior officers than Nicole had noticed initially, responded with appreciative commentary. Nicole was scheduled to shoot 7th, which meant she'd have to wait through 3 more competitors while managing the performance anxiety that threatened to trigger her symptoms. She used the waiting time to practice Dr. Morgan's breathing techniques. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. The pattern that told her nervous system this wasn't combat, wasn't life or death, just a demonstration of skills she'd executed thousands of times before. At 10:15, the range safety officer called Nicole to the line. She settled into position, her .338 Lapua comfortable and familiar. Through her scope, she acquired the first target. 600 meters, center lane, minimal complications. The mathematics took over. Wind 3 miles per hour from the north, quartering angle creating 1 mile per hour effective windage. Temperature had risen to 66 degrees, changing air density slightly. Drop compensation calculated automatically. Muscle memory from 10,000 previous shots. The first shot broke clean. Impact, center mass. The crowd murmured appreciation. Second target, 800 meters, left lane. Wind shifting to 4 miles per hour. Nicole adjusted, compensated, fired. Impact, center mass. Third target, 1,000 meters, right lane. Here the Coriolis effect became measurable. Approximately 2.8 inches of rightward drift at this latitude and distance. Nicole adjusted her aim point left to compensate. Shot broke. Impact, center mass. Fourth target, 1,000 meters, center lane. Same distance, but different firing direction meant different Coriolis calculation. Nicole ran the math, adjusted. Shot broke. Impact, slightly right of center. She'd overcorrected. Still a hit, but not perfect. Fifth target, 1,200 meters, west lane. Maximum difficulty. Firing into a slight headwind that had picked up as morning heated the air. Coriolis drift leftward this time, wind drift rightward, the 2 forces partially canceling but not completely. Nicole ran the calculations, made microscopic adjustments to her aim point. Shot broke. Impact, center mass. 6th target, 1,200 meters, east lane. The shot that Torres had said would catch unprepared shooters. Maximum distance, maximum Coriolis drift, 4.1 inches rightward, wind adding another 3 inches of drift. Total compensation needed approximately 7 inches left of target center. Nicole closed her eyes for 3 seconds, visualized the bullet's path, saw the trajectory arcing through space, watched it drift right from Earth's rotation and wind pressure, then impact exactly where she intended, opened her eyes, acquired the target, made the adjustment that felt wrong, aiming so far left of the target that it seemed impossible the bullet would hit. The shot broke. Through the scope, Nicole watched the bullet's vapor trail arc across the range, watched it drift right, watched it impact. Center mass. Time, 3 minutes 42 seconds. 6 shots, 5 center mass hits, 1 near center hit. The best performance of the competition so far, and there were only 5 competitors left to shoot. The crowd erupted in applause. Nicole cleared her weapon, stood, and tried to control the trembling in her hands. Not from the TBI this time, but from adrenaline. Colonel Hartwell approached immediately. "Sergeant Hayes, that was exceptional, particularly that last shot. I was watching your aim point and thought you'd miscalculated." Then I realized you were compensating for variables most shooters at this competition probably didn't even consider. Thank you, sir. The Coriolis effect at this latitude and distance is significant. I know what it is. Most people don't, which is why your performance just demonstrated something important. Hartwell lowered his voice. There are 2 generals here observing. Neither of them have clearance for your classified record, but they asked specifically to see you shoot after I mentioned you were an exceptional precision marksman with an unusual technical background. Nicole's stomach tightened. Generals were watching. Her performance was being evaluated at levels she hadn't anticipated. The remaining 5 competitors shot. One came close to Nicole's score, a Marine sergeant on loan to Fort Campbell who clearly had advanced training, but nobody exceeded her precision or time. At 11:45, the range safety officer announced results. First place, Sergeant Nicole Hayes. Second place, Sergeant First Class David Torres. Third place, the Marine sergeant whose name Nicole didn't catch. Colonel Hartwell presented the first place award, a plaque and a certificate that Nicole knew Morrison would have to acknowledge because it was public, witnessed, and undeniable. As the ceremony concluded, one of the generals Hartwell had mentioned approached. Sergeant Hayes, I'm Major General Patricia Reeves from Division Command. I observed your entire performance. That last shot, the compensation you made for Coriolis drift, that's not standard Army marksmanship training. Where did you learn advanced ballistic calculation? Nicole chose her words carefully. I was attached to specialized units that provided advanced training, ma'am. Specialized units. Reeves's tone suggested she understood that was code for classified operations. I see from your record that you have a traumatic brain injury. Does that affect your shooting? Here was the question Nicole had been dreading. She could minimize the injury, claim it didn't affect her performance, maintain the illusion of perfect capability, or she could be honest in ways that made her vulnerable but demonstrated the reality Colonel Hartwell had emphasized, that injury and capability could coexist. Yes, ma'am. The TBI causes symptoms including tremors, visual disturbances, and photosensitivity. I manage those symptoms through medication, therapy, and accommodations. They affect my baseline, but they don't prevent me from executing at high levels when I employ appropriate compensation strategies. Reeves studied Nicole with an expression that was hard to read. You just shot better than 90% of the snipers in this division while managing a brain injury that would disqualify most soldiers from any combat role. That's either remarkable resilience or evidence that our medical fitness standards are poorly calibrated. Perhaps both, ma'am. Reeves' expression shifted, something that might have been approval. Colonel Hartwell speaks highly of you. He also mentioned that you faced skepticism about your service record from commanders who can't access the classified portions of your file. That's accurate, ma'am. That's also unacceptable. I'm directing that all commanders with personnel who have significant classified backgrounds be given at least summary access to validate service records. Not operational details, those remain protected, but enough information to confirm that redactions represent actual service rather than fabrication. Reeves paused. Captain Morrison specifically will be briefed that your record has been reviewed at the highest levels and found to be accurate and exceptional. Nicole felt something release in her chest. This was more than validation. This was institutional acknowledgement that the skepticism she'd faced was unjustified. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. The military needs operators who can maintain effectiveness despite injury. You're proving it's possible. After the generals left, Major Chen found Nicole sitting alone near the rifle staging area. You know what you just did? Chen's voice carried barely suppressed excitement. You demonstrated capability in front of Division Command. You proved that TBI doesn't prevent precision marksmanship at the highest levels. And you got a general to commit to policy changes that will protect not just you, but every soldier with a classified record facing similar skepticism. I just shot. That's what I do. You did more than shoot. You made the invisible visible. You showed what accommodation and capability look like together. Chen stopped as her phone buzzed. She read the message and smiled. Morrison just received a message from Colonel Hartwell informing him that General Reeves will be meeting with him tomorrow to discuss your assignment and his previous concerns about your suitability. Is Morrison going to make my life hell? He might try, but he's also smart enough to recognize when he's been outmaneuvered. You've got competition results he can't dismiss, general officer support he can't challenge, and public demonstration of capability he can't deny. His options for sabotaging you are limited. Torres approached, carrying his rifle case. Congratulations on first place. That 1,200-meter east shot was perfection. Most people would have aimed center and wondered why they missed right. You hit it too. I did, but my time was 40 seconds slower. You were executing at a pace that suggests you've made those calculations so many times they're automatic. Nicole had made those calculations thousands of times, in training, in combat, in situations where the shot had to be perfect or people died. The mathematics had been drilled into her until they bypassed conscious thought. Muscle memory, she said simply. More than that, mathematical fluency at a level that most snipers never achieve. Torres lowered his voice. I talked to Captain Santos from the network. She said you called, which means you're connecting with other injured operators. That's good. You're going to need that support structure. Why do you say that? Because what you demonstrated today is going to attract attention. Some of it positive, like General Reeves' policy changes. Some of it problematic. Commanders who see you as a threat to how they understand fitness standards. Medical boards who think your performance proves you're not actually impaired. Skeptics who will find new reasons to question your capabilities. Torres met her eyes. Winning this competition solved some problems. It's also going to create new ones. Torres was right. The week following the competition brought both support and new complications. The support came from unexpected places. Soldiers in Morrison's unit who'd watched Nicole's performance and now approached her with questions about advanced techniques. Officers from other units requesting her as a guest instructor. Even a message from the Army Marksmanship Unit asking if she'd consider attending advanced instructor training. The complications came from Morrison. He was too smart to directly challenge Nicole's capabilities after her public demonstration. Instead, he shifted tactics, questioning not whether she could shoot, but whether her TBI made her reliable enough to be responsible for soldiers' training. The first sign came during a Monday morning briefing. Morrison was outlining the week's training schedule when he paused at Nicole's portion. Sergeant Hayes will be conducting rifle fundamentals training Tuesday through Thursday. However, I want to note for the record that she's requested accommodations, including modified lighting and scheduled breaks. While these accommodations are approved by Major Chen, I have concerns about whether an instructor requiring environmental modifications is modeling the adaptability we need soldiers to develop for deployment. Major Chen's expression went cold. Captain Morrison, the accommodations Sergeant Hayes requested enable her to instruct more effectively. They don't compromise training quality. They enhance it by allowing her to manage service-connected medical symptoms proactively. I understand that's the theory. I'm noting my observation that soldiers deploying to combat won't have the luxury of modified lighting or scheduled breaks. The training environment should reflect operational reality. Operational reality includes managing whatever medical conditions exist to maintain mission effectiveness. Sergeant Hayes is modeling exactly the adaptability you're describing, adjusting her environment to compensate for injury while maintaining exceptional performance. Chen's tone made it clear this wasn't a debate. Her competition results demonstrate that her accommodation strategies work. Unless you have evidence that her training is ineffective, this discussion is closed. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he moved on to other agenda items. After the briefing, Chen pulled Nicole aside. He's building a paper trail, documenting concerns that establish a pattern suggesting you're high maintenance or require special treatment. None of it will be enough to justify removing you, but it creates a narrative that undermines your credibility over time. What do I do? Document everything. When he raises concerns in briefings, I'll counter them officially. When he makes comments to soldiers about your accommodations, document the specific statements and report them. And most importantly, keep your training outcomes exceptional. Make it impossible for him to claim your accommodations compromise effectiveness. That Tuesday, Nicole conducted her first rifle fundamentals class with Morrison's unit. 40 soldiers, various skill levels, all needing to qualify before deployment in 6 weeks. She'd prepared the training plan carefully. Start with breathing and trigger control, move to sight picture and position, end with live fire exercises that would give her baseline data on each soldier's capabilities. The amber-tinted glasses she wore to reduce photosensitivity drew immediate attention. One soldier, a private named Jackson who'd always struck Nicole as someone who questioned authority, raised his hand during the safety brief. Sergeant Hayes, why are you wearing sunglasses indoors? Nicole had anticipated this question. These are not sunglasses. They're prescription lenses with amber tint to reduce fluorescent light sensitivity, which is a symptom of my service-connected traumatic brain injury. The glasses allow me to instruct more effectively by managing photosensitivity that would otherwise trigger migraines. Jackson looked uncertain whether to press the point. Another soldier, Specialist Rodriguez, who'd asked about Nicole's TBI for his brother, spoke up. Sergeant Hayes has a TBI from combat and still won the division marksmanship competition last week. She's managing her injury while being better at shooting than basically everyone on this base. Maybe we should focus on learning from her instead of questioning her glasses. The classroom went quiet. Nicole appreciated Rodriguez's support, but also recognized it had made Jackson defensive. Private Jackson's question is fair, Nicole said, diffusing the tension. I'm asking you to trust my instruction, which means I owe you transparency about my capabilities and limitations. Yes, I have a TBI. Yes, I manage symptoms including photosensitivity, occasional tremors, and hypervigilance. No, those symptoms don't prevent me from teaching you to shoot effectively. They just mean I use accommodations to maintain optimal function. She pulled up a slide showing her competition scores. These are my results from last week. 6 shots from 600 to 1200 meters, 5 center mass hits, 3 minutes 42 seconds. That performance demonstrates that accommodation and capability coexist. I expect the same from all of you. Not that you'll be perfect, but that you'll identify your limitations and develop strategies to work within or around them. The class proceeded smoothly after that. Nicole taught breathing control, the fundamental skill that separated accurate shooters from spray and pray soldiers. She had them practice without ammunition, just dry fire exercises focused on trigger press timing coordinated with breath. At 10:30, 90 minutes into instruction, Nicole felt the familiar warning signs of sensory overload, sounds becoming too sharp, lights too bright, the awareness of 40 people in one room pressing against her hypervigilance like physical weight. She'd planned for this. 10-minute break. Use the restroom, get water, check your phones. We resume at 10:40. As soldiers filed out, Morrison appeared at the classroom door. He'd been observing from the back, Nicole realized, documenting her instruction. Taking a break already? We're only 90 minutes in. Scheduled break to prevent sensory overload. Allows me to maintain instructional quality for the remaining 2 hours. Nicole kept her voice professional, aware that Morrison was looking for any sign of defensiveness. Most instructors teach 3-hour blocks without breaks. Most instructors don't have TBIs that require proactive symptom management. My approved accommodation plan includes 10-minute breaks every 90 minutes during extended instruction. Major Chen signed off on this specifically. I'm aware. I'm observing how it affects training flow. The training flow is optimal. Students get a cognitive break that helps them retain information. I manage symptoms before they become debilitating, and we maintain the schedule without compromising content delivery. Morrison made notes on his tablet. We'll see how students perform on qualifications. After he left, Major Chen entered the classroom. She'd also been observing, Nicole realized. The entire session had been watched by both her supporter and her critic. That was well handled, Chen said. Morrison was looking for evidence that your breaks disrupt training. Instead, he saw you managing accommodations professionally while maintaining student engagement. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. The class resumed at 10:40. Nicole taught position and sight picture, having students practice proper stance and cheek weld without live ammunition. The fundamentals that most soldiers rushed through but that Nicole knew were the foundation of accurate shooting. At 1200, the class moved to the range for live fire exercises. Nicole had each soldier fire 5 rounds at 50 meters, while she observed technique and made corrections. Private Jackson was struggling. His groups were scattered across the target. No consistency to his impacts. Jackson, show me your trigger press. He demonstrated, jerking the trigger in a way that pulled his aim point off target before the round fired. Reset. Focus on the surprise break. You want the shot to surprise you, not be something you're forcing to happen. Nicole positioned herself behind him. Breathe in, hold. Start pressure on the trigger while exhaling slowly. The shot should break when you're not expecting it. Jackson tried again. This time his impact was closer to center. Better. That's the feeling you want. Smooth, continuous pressure until the shot breaks naturally. By the end of the session, Jackson's groups had tightened significantly. Not perfect, but improved enough that he thanked Nicole as the class ended. I've been shooting the same way for 3 years. Nobody ever corrected my trigger press. You fixed it in 1 session. That's what good instruction does, identifies the limiting factor and provides specific correction. That evening, Nicole received a message from Captain Santos. Heard about Morrison's counterattack. Document everything. Also, there's someone who wants to meet you. a civilian who does TBI research for the military. She's interested in how high-performing operators manage symptoms while maintaining capability. Interested? Nicole typed her response. Maybe. What's the catch? No catch. She's genuinely trying to help develop better support systems for injured operators. But it would mean being visible about your injury in ways you've been avoiding. Nicole thought about Rodriguez's brother, about the soldier in class who defended her against Jackson's question, about General Reeves's comment that she was proving injury and capability could coexist. Maybe visibility wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the only way to change how the institution thought about injured operators. Set up the meeting, Nicole typed. Dr. Jennifer Wu was not what Nicole expected. She'd anticipated a detached academic type, someone treating injured operators as research subjects rather than people. Instead, Wu was warm, direct, and clearly familiar with military culture. Sergeant Hayes, thank you for meeting with me. I'm a neuroscientist working on traumatic brain injury rehabilitation for the Department of Defense. My specific focus is understanding how some individuals maintain high-level performance despite significant TBI symptoms, while others with similar injuries are completely disabled. They were sitting in a quiet conference room at the Fort Campbell Medical Facility. Major Chen had insisted on attending as Nicole's advocate, making sure Wu's research intentions were legitimate. What's your hypothesis? Nicole asked. That traditional TBI rehabilitation focuses on recovery, trying to restore pre-injury function. But some individuals don't recover in conventional ways. Instead, they adapt, developing compensation strategies that allow them to perform at high levels despite ongoing symptoms. Wu pulled up data on her laptop. You're a perfect example. Your medical records show moderate to severe TBI symptoms: tremors, photosensitivity, visual disturbances, hypervigilance. Yet you just won a marksmanship competition shooting at distances where most uninjured snipers would struggle. I use accommodations and compensation strategies. Exactly, and I want to understand those strategies in detail. Not to prove you're miraculously recovered, you're not, but to document how adaptation works so we can teach it to other injured operators. Nicole felt her guard lowering slightly. Wu wasn't trying to minimize the injury or suggest Nicole was exaggerating symptoms. She was acknowledging the reality while trying to learn from it. What would this research involve? Detailed interviews about your compensation strategies. Cognitive testing to understand how your brain has reorganized function around damaged areas. Observation of your shooting technique to identify what adaptations you've made. And possibly functional MRI imaging to see which neural pathways you're using compared to uninjured shooters. Why me specifically? Because your case is exceptional. Most operators with your level of TBI severity are medically retired. You're not just serving, you're excelling. Understanding how you've maintained capability despite significant injury could help hundreds of other operators facing similar struggles. Major Chen leaned forward. Dr. Wu, what's the institutional benefit here? How does this research translate to policy changes that help injured operators? Good question. The military's current approach is binary, fit for duty or medically separated. There's no framework for injured but capable with accommodation. My research aims to establish that framework, to provide evidence-based guidelines for when accommodation enables continued service, and when injury truly prevents safe performance. Wu pulled up more slides. I've documented 12 cases of operators maintaining high performance despite significant injuries. 7 TBIs, 3 amputations, 2 chronic pain conditions. What they all have in common is sophisticated compensation strategies and institutional support for accommodation. What they lack is recognition. Their capabilities are questioned, despite demonstrated performance. Nicole recognized her own experience in that description. You're trying to make the invisible visible. Exactly. Injured operators are invisible when their achievements are classified, when their adaptations are private, when institutional bias treats injury as automatic disqualification. Making the adaptation process visible and studied could change how the military approaches medical retention. What's the risk to me? Wu didn't hesitate. Visibility. Right now, you can hide the severity of your symptoms from people who don't have access to your medical records. Participating in this research means acknowledging publicly that your TBI is significant and ongoing. Some people will see that as weakness. Others will use it to question your capabilities despite evidence to the contrary. But without visibility, nothing changes. The next injured operator faces the same battles you've faced. The institution continues treating injury as disqualification rather than challenge to be accommodated. Nicole looked at Major Chen, who nodded slightly. Then back to Wu. What's the timeline? Initial phase is 3 months. Interviews, testing, observation. I'd want to document your teaching process, how you instruct while managing symptoms, what adaptations you make, how you maintain effectiveness. Then we'd compile findings into a report for DoD with recommendations for policy changes. And my classified record stays classified. I don't need operational details. I need performance metrics and compensation strategies. The fact that you made a shot at 2,247 yards is public knowledge from your competition results. I don't need to know the mission context to study how you calculated ballistics or managed symptoms during execution. Nicole made her decision. I'll participate, but I want Major Chen involved in reviewing any findings before publication. And I want veto power over anything that could compromise operational security. Agreed. We'll create a formal protocol that protects your interests while allowing meaningful research. They spent the next hour discussing logistics. Wu would embed with Nicole's training unit for 2 weeks, observing her instruction and documenting adaptation strategies. Then Nicole would complete cognitive testing at the medical facility, followed by interviews about specific compensation techniques she'd developed. After Wu left, Chen turned to Nicole. You know this makes you even more visible, right? Morrison will know you're participating in TBI research. He'll probably use it to suggest you're more impaired than you admit. Probably. But General Reeves is already aware of my TBI, I told her directly at the competition. And she responded by saying the military needs operators who can maintain effectiveness despite injury. If I'm going to be visible anyway, might as well make that visibility count for something. You're becoming an advocate whether you intended to or not. I know. Torres warned me this would happen. Winning the competition solved some problems but created others. Now I'm the person people point to when discussing injured operators. That's both opportunity and burden. Chen's expression was proud but also concerned. Just make sure you're not sacrificing your own well-being for institutional change. You're allowed to take care of yourself. I'm trying to do both. That evening, Nicole had a session with Dr. Morgan. She described the meeting with Wu and her decision to participate in the research. How do you feel about making your injury more public? Morgan asked. Scared, hopeful, angry that it's necessary. Nicole paused. I shouldn't have to expose my vulnerability to prove I'm capable. But if I don't, nothing changes. That's a mature understanding of the situation. You're recognizing that individual safety and collective progress sometimes require different strategies. Rodriguez, one of the soldiers in my class, he said watching me manage TBI while being excellent at shooting gave his brother hope. Wu said documenting my adaptation strategies could help hundreds of injured operators. General Reeves said I'm proving that injury and capability can coexist. Nicole looked at Morgan. I'm tired of fighting alone. If being visible helps other people fight more effectively, maybe that's worth the personal cost. As long as you're honest about that cost. Visibility means scrutiny. Scrutiny means stress. Stress triggers your symptoms. You need to manage that cycle, or it becomes unsustainable. They spent the rest of the session developing strategies for managing the increased visibility. Morgan taught Nicole techniques for setting boundaries, how to say no to requests that would overextend her, how to protect private medical information while being public about general challenges, how to advocate for institutional change without becoming responsible for solving every injured operator's problems. You're becoming a symbol, Morgan said. Symbols are powerful, but also limiting. Make sure you remain a person, with needs, limits, and the right to prioritize your own well-being. 2 weeks into Dr. Wu's observation period, everything came to a head. Nicole was conducting live fire training with Morrison's unit when Private Jackson, the soldier who'd questioned her glasses, had a weapon malfunction. His rifle jammed during rapid fire, and instead of following clearing procedures, he panicked and turned toward the firing line with the weapon pointed in an unsafe direction. Nicole's training kicked in instantly. She closed the distance in 3 strides, controlled Jackson's weapon, cleared the malfunction, and ensured the rifle was safe, all in under 5 seconds. Weapon is clear and safe, she announced to the range safety officer. Then to Jackson. What's the protocol when you have a malfunction? Jackson was shaking. I forgot, I panicked. That's why we drill procedures until they're automatic. Your panic response just put 40 people at risk because you turned with a potentially live weapon. Nicole's voice was firm but not angry. Reset. We're going to practice malfunction clearing until you can do it without thinking. Morrison had been observing from the tower. He came down immediately. his expression suggesting he'd found something to criticize. "Sergeant Hayes, that was an aggressive physical intervention with a soldier under your instruction." Nicole kept her voice level. "That was a safety intervention preventing a negligent discharge. Private Jackson violated range safety protocols by turning with a potentially live weapon. I controlled the weapon and cleared the malfunction per standard procedures." "You put your hands on a soldier." "I controlled a weapon that was pointed in an unsafe direction. That's exactly what range safety requires." Nicole's patience was eroding. "Are you suggesting I should have let him continue pointing a malfunctioning rifle at other soldiers?" "I'm suggesting that your reaction was disproportionate. You moved very quickly, very aggressively. Some might interpret that as hypervigilance, an overreaction driven by PTSD rather than rational assessment of danger." The accusation hit Nicole like a physical blow. Morrison was using her medical profile against her, suggesting that her quick reaction, which any competent range instructor would have had, was actually a symptom of psychological impairment. "Captain Morrison, that's inappropriate." Major Chen had been observing from another position and arrived quickly. Sergeant Hayes responded exactly as any qualified range safety officer would respond to a weapon being pointed in an unsafe direction. Her speed of reaction demonstrates competence, not impairment. "I'm documenting my observation that Sergeant Hayes may be experiencing hypervigilance symptoms that affect her judgment in high-stress situations. Document whatever you want. I'm documenting that you just attributed appropriate safety procedures to mental illness, which is both medically inaccurate and unprofessional." Chen's voice was ice cold. "This conversation is over. Sergeant Hayes, continue training." But Nicole couldn't continue. The combination of Morrison's accusation, the adrenaline from the safety intervention, and the stress of 2 weeks being constantly observed by Dr. Wu had triggered a full cascade of symptoms. Her hands were shaking visibly. Her vision was starting to fragment at the edges, the warning sign of an impending migraine. Sound was becoming painful, each gunshot from nearby lanes feeling like impacts against her skull. "Major Chen, I need 10 minutes. Chen assessed Nicole's condition immediately. "Take 15. I'll supervise the remainder of the training session." Nicole walked to her vehicle, got in, closed the door, and let the symptoms wash over her. Tremors, visual disturbances. The crushing headache that meant a migraine was fully establishing. The hypervigilance that made her acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every potential threat in her environment. Morrison had just done exactly what she'd feared, used her TBI symptoms as evidence of impairment in a situation where her response had been textbook correct, and she'd been unable to defend herself because the symptoms he'd triggered through his accusation were now proving his point. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Wu, who'd been observing from a different vantage point. "I saw what happened. Morrison's attribution of appropriate safety response to PTSD hypervigilance is clinically wrong and ethically problematic. I'm documenting this for my research as an example of how institutional bias misinterprets competent performance through the lens of injury." Nicole appreciated Wu's support, but it didn't change the immediate reality. She was sitting in her vehicle having a medical episode that Morrison would definitely document as evidence she was unreliable. Another text, this time from Rodriguez. "Sergeant Hayes, everyone in the class knows you just prevented a potential disaster. Jackson was pointing his rifle at us. You stopped it. Don't let Capt. Morrison make you think you did anything wrong." 15 minutes later, Nicole's symptoms had stabilized enough to return to training. Major Chen had finished the session, dismissed the soldiers, and was waiting with Morrison near the range office. "Sergeant Hayes required a medical break," Morrison was saying as Nicole approached, after an incident where her response time suggested possible hypervigilance symptoms affecting judgment. "Actually," Dr. Wu said, stepping forward from where she'd been observing, "Sergeant Hayes's response time was optimal for the safety threat presented. Average reaction time for trained personnel responding to an unsafe weapon is 1.5 to 2 seconds. Sergeant Hayes's response was approximately 1.2 seconds, which is faster than average but not indicative of pathological hypervigilance. It's indicative of superior training and maintained capability despite injury." Morrison looked surprised that Wu was inserting herself into the discussion. "And your expertise is?" "Dr. Jennifer Wu, neuroscientist specializing in traumatic brain injury performance optimization for the Department of Defense. I'm conducting authorized research on Sergeant Hayes's adaptation strategies. What I observed today was textbook appropriate response to a safety hazard, followed by a stress-induced symptom cascade that Sergeant Hayes managed professionally by requesting appropriate time to stabilize before resuming duties. Wu pulled up data on her tablet. Captain Morrison, would you like to see the cognitive testing results that demonstrate Sergeant Hayes' reaction time, threat assessment, and motor control are all within normal ranges for uninjured personnel? Or the performance metrics showing her instruction has improved student qualification rates by 23% compared to previous instructors? Or perhaps the documented evidence that her accommodation requests correlate with better training outcomes, not worse? Morrison's jaw was clenched. I'm documenting my observations as a commander responsible for unit safety. Document whatever you want. I'm documenting as a DoD researcher that you're systematically misattributing competent performance to pathological symptoms, which is both clinically inaccurate and institutionally harmful. Wu's voice was professionally pleasant, but her words were steel. I'll be including this incident in my report to General Reeves, who specifically requested documentation of how institutional bias affects injured operators' careers. After Morrison left, fuming but unable to effectively argue against a DoD researcher, Chen turned to Nicole. You okay? Not really. My symptoms are manageable, but Morrison just did exactly what I've been afraid of. Used appropriate professional response as evidence of psychological impairment. And Wu just documented that his interpretation is wrong, along with Rodriguez and 20 other soldiers who watched you prevent a safety disaster. Chen's expression was determined. This might actually be the incident that finally ends Morrison's campaign against you, because now there are too many witnesses, too much documentation, and too much expert testimony that his bias is affecting his judgment. Nicole wanted to believe that. But she'd been fighting this battle for 2 years, and every time she thought she'd finally proven herself, someone found a new angle of attack. She arrived at 1345, wanting time to collect herself before whatever was coming. The hallway outside Hartwell's office was empty. No other soldiers waiting, no administrative staff hovering. Whatever this meeting was about, it was private. At exactly 1400, Hartwell's door opened. But it wasn't Hartwell who appeared. Major General Patricia Reeves stood in the doorway, 2 stars gleaming on her shoulders. Behind her, Nicole could see Colonel Hartwell and another officer she didn't recognize, a lieutenant colonel with the combat infantryman badge and ranger tab. Sergeant Hayes, come in. Reeves's voice was firm but not unkind. Nicole entered, came to attention, saluted. The room felt too small for the amount of rank it contained. At ease. Sit. Reeves gestured to a chair positioned facing all 3 officers. This was an interview, Nicole realized, or an interrogation. Sergeant Hayes, I'm going to be direct because that's how I operate, and I think that's how you operate. Reeves settled into her chair with the easy authority of someone who'd earned every ounce of respect her rank commanded. I've spent the last 72 hours reviewing your complete service record, including the portions that Captain Morrison doesn't have clearance to access. I've spoken with your former task force commander. I've reviewed after-action reports from operations you participated in, and I've watched video footage of the range incident 3 days ago. Nicole's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. What I've found, Reeves continued, is a pattern of exceptional service followed by institutional failure. You sustained a traumatic brain injury while providing overwatch for a high-risk operation. You continued to operate for 90 minutes after that injury, completing your mission before reporting symptoms. The delay in treatment contributed to the severity of your long-term condition. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am. And since your medical evaluation and diagnosis, you've faced skepticism from multiple commanders who question whether your service record is legitimate, whether your injury is real, and whether you're capable of performing duties despite your medical profile. Yes, ma'am. Captain Morrison represents the most recent and most aggressive example of this pattern. He's documented concerns about your reliability, questioned your medical accommodations, and Reeves's voice took on an edge that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Attributed appropriate safety responses to psychological impairment in a way that's both clinically inaccurate and professionally unconscionable. The lieutenant colonel Nicole didn't recognize spoke for the first time. His voice had a Texas drawl that softened the formality of his words. Sergeant Hayes, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rivera. I commanded the task force you were attached to during Operation Phantom Cord. Nicole felt the air leave her lungs. Phantom Cord. The operation she couldn't talk about, that existed only in classified files, that justified years of redacted service records. I was in the operations center when you made the decision to manually disarm the secondary IED, Rivera continued. I watched you save 47 lives, 7 high-value targets and 40 civilians in structures that would have collapsed from a controlled detonation. I also watched you lose 2 teammates because the intelligence we provided was incomplete. Nicole's hands trembled slightly. She folded them in her lap. What Captain Morrison doesn't understand, Rivera said, is that your response to Private Jackson's weapon malfunction wasn't hypervigilance or PTSD-driven overreaction. It was the instinct of someone who's made life-or-death decisions in microseconds, someone whose muscle memory includes controlling weapons in high-stress situations, someone whose training is so deeply embedded that appropriate safety responses look aggressive to people who've never operated at your level. Reeves leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant Hayes. Colonel Hartwell is relieving Captain Morrison of his command effective immediately. Morrison will be reassigned to a staff position where his bias cannot affect soldiers under his authority. Major Chen will assume command of the training unit, with you as the senior marksmanship instructor. Additionally, she paused, and Nicole saw something shift in the general's expression. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. Additionally, I'm authorizing a formal review of medical retention policies for operators with combat-related injuries. You're not the only soldier facing skepticism because your capabilities don't match the institution's understanding of what injury looks like. There are amputees being forced out because the medical board can't conceive of how prosthetics enable continued service. There are soldiers with PTSD being dismissed because they're honest about their symptoms. There are operators like you, highly capable, highly specialized, managing significant injuries, who are being discarded because we lack the institutional imagination to accommodate excellence that doesn't look like we expect it to. Nicole absorbed this. It was more than she'd hoped for. It was also carefully worded. Reeves was promising review, not change. Recognition, not solution. Ma'am, with respect, how many other soldiers are in situations like mine? Based on preliminary data? At least 200 across all branches. That's 200 operators with specialized skills, combat experience, and proven performance being pushed out because they sustained injuries doing exactly what we asked them to do. And this review will help them? Reeves's expression became more guarded. I can't promise that. What I can promise is that your case will be part of the evidence that change is necessary. That documentation of your performance, your competition results, your training outcomes, your ability to manage symptoms while maintaining excellence, will be used to argue for policy reform. So I'm a test case. You're a soldier who deserves better than what the institution has given you. If making your capabilities visible helps other soldiers receive better treatment, that's not using you. That's honoring your service by ensuring it means something beyond your individual experience. Lieutenant Colonel Rivera added, the network Captain Santos and Sergeant Torres told you about? General Reeves is aware of it. She's been quietly supporting it through channels I can't discuss. This review isn't coming from nowhere. It's coming from years of advocacy by injured operators and commanders who recognize the system is broken. Nicole looked at Colonel Hartwell, who'd been silent throughout this conversation. He met her gaze steadily. Sergeant Hayes, I brought General Reeves here because I couldn't solve this problem at battalion level. Morrison's bias is symptomatic of institutional failure that requires institutional solutions. But I want you to understand something. Hartwell's voice carried the weight of someone making a difficult admission. Even with the general's intervention, even with policy reviews and documentation, you're still going to face skepticism. People who don't have clearance for your record will still question your capabilities. Soldiers who don't understand TBI will still attribute your accommodations to weakness. The fight doesn't end with this meeting. I know, sir. Do you? Hartwell's question wasn't challenging. It was genuine. Because I've seen soldiers break under less pressure than you've been under. The fact that you're still here, still performing, still fighting, that's remarkable. But it's also unsustainable if you don't have support structures in place. General Reeves stood, signaling the meeting was shifting. Sergeant Hayes, I'm assigning you a military attorney who specializes in medical retention cases. Her name is Captain Sarah Mendez. She'll help you navigate any future challenges to your service. I'm also authorizing priority mental health care through Walter Reed's TBI clinic, with your choice of providers. Dr. Jennifer Wu has requested to continue her research with you. That's your decision, but I recommend accepting. Her documentation of your adaptation strategies is some of the most compelling evidence we have for policy change. Yes, ma'am, I'll consider it. One more thing. Reeves pulled a small wooden box from her briefcase. She opened it, revealing a medal Nicole recognized immediately. The Silver Star. This was awarded to you in a classified ceremony 4 years ago for actions during Operation Phantom Cord. 6 people attended that ceremony, all with appropriate clearances. Today, I'm authorizing a second presentation, public this time, so that your chain of command, your soldiers, and anyone who questions your service record can see tangible evidence of what you've accomplished. Nicole felt tears threatening, but forced them back. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You earned this by making an impossible choice under impossible circumstances. 47 people are alive because of that choice. 2 teammates died despite your best efforts. You've carried that weight for 4 years while people questioned whether you'd ever done anything worth recognizing. That ends today. The presentation ceremony was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away, in front of the entire battalion. Nicole would have to stand at attention while General Reeves read a sanitized version of the citation, while soldiers who doubted her watched, while Captain Morrison, wherever he was reassigned, heard about it through the military grapevine. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like exposure. The days leading up to the medal ceremony were surreal. News spread through Fort Campbell faster than Nicole could have imagined. The female sergeant with the TBI was receiving a Silver Star from a 2-star general for a classified operation nobody could talk about. Reactions varied. Some soldiers approached her with newfound respect, asking technical questions about advanced marksmanship or sharing their own struggles with combat injuries. Others maintained their skepticism, suggesting the medal was politically motivated or that the classified nature of the operation meant it couldn't be verified. Captain Morrison sent a single email. "Congratulations on your recognition, Sergeant Hayes." Nothing more. Nicole didn't respond. The soldier who affected her most was Specialist Rodriguez. He found her at the range 2 days before the ceremony, his usual enthusiasm tempered by something more serious. "Sergeant Hayes, I told my brother about you, about your TBI, about the competition, about everything." "How did he respond?" "He cried, first time since his accident." Rodriguez's voice was thick with emotion. "He said he'd been thinking about killing himself, thought his life was over. Then I showed him your competition scores, told him you have worse symptoms than he does, but you're still serving, still teaching, still excellent at what you do." Nicole felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. I'm not cured. I'm not even recovered. I'm adapted, and some days that adaptation fails. Your brother shouldn't compare himself to me. Everyone's injury is different. I know." I told him that, but he said something that I think you need to hear. Rodriguez pulled out his phone, read from a text message. "Tell your sergeant that she gave me permission to be broken and functional at the same time." That's what I needed. Not inspiration porn about overcoming obstacles, but proof that I can be injured and still matter. Nicole had to turn away for a moment, composing herself. When she turned back, Rodriguez was watching her with understanding beyond his years. "You matter, Sergeant. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And that Silver Star they're giving you, it's not about being a hero. It's about being human and doing the job anyway." The ceremony was scheduled for 1,000 on Friday morning. The entire battalion formed up on the parade field. 400 soldiers in dress uniform, standing in formation under a sky that threatened rain but held off. Nicole stood at the front, Major Chen beside her, Colonel Hartwell and Lieutenant Colonel Rivera behind them. General Reeves approached from the reviewing stand, her aide carrying the medal case. The citation was carefully sanitized. "The Silver Star is presented to Staff Sergeant Nicole Hayes for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, while serving in a classified capacity in support of Operation Enduring Freedom." On 6 August 2011, Sergeant Hayes distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous actions during a high-risk operation to secure high-value targets in hostile territory. When faced with a complex explosive threat that endangered friendly forces and civilian personnel, Sergeant Hayes, serving as the Senior Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist, made the critical decision to manually neutralize the device despite significant personal risk. Her actions under fire resulted in the successful completion of the mission and the preservation of 47 lives. Sergeant Hayes's technical expertise, decisive leadership, and willing self-sacrifice reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. What the citation didn't say, that the explosion had come anyway, that 2 teammates had died, that Nicole had sustained a brain injury that would affect every day of her life afterward, that she'd carried the guilt of that impossible choice for 4 years, while people questioned whether she'd ever done anything worth remembering. General Reeves pinned the medal to Nicole's uniform. When she stepped back to salute, she added words that weren't in any script. Phantom. Nicole's call sign, spoken publicly for the first time. An acknowledgement that the redacted sections of her record were real, that the soldier standing before them had operated at levels most of them couldn't imagine. The battalion erupted in applause, not the polite applause of military ceremony, but genuine, sustained recognition. Nicole saw soldiers she'd trained standing taller, saw Major Chen wiping tears unapologetically, saw Colonel Hartwell nodding with satisfaction. She didn't see Captain Morrison, but she imagined him somewhere receiving word of this ceremony and having to reconcile his assumptions with documented reality. After the formation dismissed, Nicole was surrounded by soldiers wanting to congratulate her. She handled it with the same professional grace she'd maintained throughout, answering questions where appropriate, deflecting when details strayed into classified territory. Dr. Jennifer Wu approached during a brief gap in the crowd. "That citation mentioned EOD specialty. I didn't know that was part of your background. There's a lot you don't know. That's the nature of classified work. Will you tell me? For the research?" Nicole considered this. The research was supposed to help other injured operators. Making her specialization visible might provide context for why her compensation strategies were so sophisticated. She hadn't just been a conventional soldier, she'd been someone operating at the intersection of multiple specialized skill sets. Some of it, not the operational details, but the training pipeline, the selection process, what made the work unique. Would that help? Immensely. Most people don't understand that Tier 1 operators aren't just physically elite. They're intellectually operating at levels that require the kind of neural adaptability you've demonstrated despite injury. Then let's schedule time to discuss it. After I get through the next 72 hours of people treating me like I'm suddenly different than I was last week. Wu smiled. You're not different. You're just visible now. There's a distinction. The week following the ceremony brought changes Nicole hadn't anticipated. The most immediate was the flood of contact requests. Veterans organizations wanting her to speak, military publications requesting interviews, advocacy groups asking her to serve on boards addressing women's service issues. Major Chen helped her filter requests, declining most, accepting a few carefully selected opportunities that aligned with supporting other injured operators without becoming Nicole's full-time occupation. You're not responsible for solving every veteran's problems, Chen reminded her during a session sorting through emails. Your job is to teach soldiers to shoot and to manage your own recovery. Everything else is optional, but some opportunities felt less optional. Captain Sarah Mendez, the military attorney General Reeves had assigned, contacted Nicole about testifying before a Department of Defense panel reviewing medical retention policies. Your case is exactly the kind of evidence they need, Mendez explained during their first meeting. Documented exceptional performance, clear medical condition, institutional bias that nearly ended your career despite objective evidence of capability. If you're willing to testify, we can use your experience to argue for systemic reform. What would testimony involve? Approximately 2 hours before a panel of senior officers and DoD civilians, you'd describe your service, your injury, the challenges you've faced since diagnosis, and how accommodation has enabled continued performance. I'd guide you through the testimony and handle any inappropriate questions. Nicole thought about the 200 other operators General Reeves had mentioned, soldiers facing the same battles she'd fought, most without a general's intervention or public recognition to validate their capabilities. If I testify, does it help them? It creates precedent. It establishes that the current system is failing soldiers who could continue serving productively with appropriate accommodation. Will it guarantee change? No. But silence guarantees nothing changes. Then I'll testify. The testimony was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving Nicole time to prepare and to continue her work with Morrison's, now Chen's, training unit. The soldiers who'd watched her receive the Silver Star approached training with renewed focus. Qualification scores improved measurably. Even Private Jackson, who'd nearly caused a safety incident, became one of the most diligent students. I didn't understand, Jackson admitted during a one-on-one coaching session. I thought your accommodations meant you were weak. Then I saw the medal ceremony and realized you'd done more in one operation than most soldiers do in entire careers. I'm sorry I doubted you. Don't apologize to me. Learn from it. The next soldier you serve with might have an invisible injury. Your assumption that accommodation equals weakness could cost them their career or their life if they're afraid to ask for help because of stigma. Jackson nodded seriously. I'll do better, Sergeant. These moments, soldiers genuinely learning, genuinely changing their understanding, felt more meaningful than any medal ceremony. This was the work Nicole understood. Incremental progress, one soldier at a time, building capability through repetition and refinement. But visibility also brought complications. A reporter from Army Times contacted her requesting an interview about women in combat roles and the hidden cost of war. The request was professional, the reporter's previous work thoughtful, but Nicole hesitated. My story isn't about being a woman, she told Major Chen. It's about being a soldier with a combat injury facing institutional bias. Gender is part of that, but it's not the whole story. Tell the reporter that. Set the terms of the interview. You control your narrative now. Use that power carefully. Nicole eventually agreed to the interview with strict conditions. No photographs that would compromise operational security. No details about classified operations beyond what was in the public citation. Focus on institutional challenges rather than personal tragedy. The interview itself was professional but emotionally exhausting. The reporter asked intelligent questions about the disconnect between Nicole's classified record and her public treatment, about the specific challenges women veterans faced, about whether the military's medical retention system was equipped to handle the reality of modern combat injuries. Nicole answered honestly, carefully, aware that her words would be read by soldiers facing similar struggles and by commanders with the power to help or harm them. When asked if she thought the military was doing enough to support injured veterans, Nicole paused before responding. The military is made up of people. Some of those people, like General Reeves, Colonel Hartwell, Major Chen, are fighting to make the system better. Others, and I won't name them, are so invested in their assumptions about what capability looks like that they can't recognize excellence when it doesn't match their expectations. The institution will only change when enough people in positions of authority decide that discarding trained, experienced, capable operators because they sustained injuries doing their jobs is strategically stupid and morally wrong. The reporter's eyebrows raised slightly. That's a fairly direct critique. I've earned the right to be direct. I've got a silver star that says I performed at the highest level under the worst circumstances. I've got medical documentation that says I'm managing a significant brain injury. Both things are true. The system needs to be able to hold both truths simultaneously. The Department of Defense panel convened in a nondescript conference room in the Pentagon. Nicole had never been to the Pentagon before. Her previous work had kept her in forward operating bases and classified facilities, not the bureaucratic heart of the military. Captain Mendez had prepared her extensively. They'll try to make this about you, about whether you specifically can continue serving. Don't let them. Make it about policy, about the institutional failure that affects hundreds of soldiers. The panel consisted of 5 people, 2 lieutenant generals, 1 rear admiral, and 2 senior DoD civilians, whose exact roles Nicole didn't fully understand but who clearly had authority over personnel policy. Nicole wore her dress uniform with the silver star prominently displayed. She'd debated whether that was appropriate, using her medal as armor, but Mendez had been firm. They need to see evidence of your service. The medal isn't bragging, it's documentation. The senior member of the panel, Lieutenant General Catherine Torres, opened the proceedings. Sergeant Hayes, thank you for agreeing to testify. Your service record is exceptional, and your willingness to speak candidly about your experiences will help us understand how current policies are affecting retention of skilled personnel. Thank you, ma'am. Tell us, in your own words, about the challenges you've faced since sustaining your injury. Nicole had prepared this statement with Mendez, refining it over multiple drafts until it captured the essential truth without becoming a personal grievance session. Ma'am, I sustained a traumatic brain injury on 6 August 2011 while providing overwatch for a special operations mission. I continued operating for 90 minutes after the injury before reporting symptoms. The delay in treatment contributed to the severity of my ongoing condition, which includes chronic migraines, photosensitivity, periodic tremors, and visual disturbances. Since my diagnosis, I've faced consistent skepticism about whether my injury is real, whether my service record is legitimate, and whether I'm capable of performing duties despite medical limitations. I've been accused of exaggerating symptoms to receive benefits I don't deserve. I've had commanders attribute appropriate professional responses to psychological impairment. I've been told that requesting reasonable accommodations, like wearing amber-tinted glasses to reduce light sensitivity, indicates I'm unfit for service. This skepticism exists despite documented performance that exceeds standards. I won the division marksmanship competition while managing TBI symptoms. I've improved student qualification rates by 23% in my current teaching role. I maintain all required certifications and clearances. By any objective measure, I'm a high-performing soldier who happens to require some accommodation to perform optimally. The institutional failure isn't that I have limitations. It's that the military cannot process the reality of capable soldiers with permanent injuries. The assumption is binary. Either you're fully fit and require no accommodation, or you're impaired and should be medically separated. There's no framework for injured but highly capable with appropriate support. One of the DoD civilians, a woman whose nameplate read Dr. Patricia Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, Nicole hoped, leaned forward. Sergeant Hayes, help us understand the specific accommodations you require and how they enable continued service. Nicole ran through her list. Amber-tinted glasses for photosensitivity, brief breaks during extended briefings to manage hypervigilance, flexible scheduling for medical appointments, access to quieter workspaces when sensory overload threatened, permission to use noise-canceling technology in non-tactical environments. None of these accommodations compromise my ability to teach marksmanship or to maintain my own skills. They simply allow me to manage symptoms proactively, rather than pushing through until I'm non-functional. The resistance I've encountered isn't because the accommodations are unreasonable. It's because they make my injury visible. And visible injury challenges the assumption that I couldn't possibly be as capable as my record indicates. The Rear Admiral asked, how do you respond to concerns that accommodation in training environments sets unrealistic expectations for combat deployments where such accommodations may not be available? This was the trap Mendez had warned about, the suggestion that because combat doesn't accommodate injury, training shouldn't either. Sir, with respect, that question contains a flawed premise. The accommodations I require for optimal function in a training environment are different from what I'd require in an operational environment. If I were deployed, I'd manage symptoms differently, because mission requirements would dictate different priorities. The ability to perform in combat isn't determined by whether you need amber-tinted glasses in a fluorescent-lit classroom. It's determined by whether you can execute under pressure when lives are at stake. My performance during the operation that earned me the Silver Star occurred while I was already showing early symptoms of TBI from a previous blast exposure I hadn't reported. I executed successfully despite impairment. That's not a failure of accommodation. That's evidence that trained operators find ways to accomplish the mission regardless of personal condition. The question isn't whether injured soldiers can perform without accommodation. It's whether we're going to force them to suffer unnecessarily when reasonable adjustments would enable sustainable performance. Lieutenant General Torres made notes, her expression unreadable. Sergeant Hayes, you mentioned that approximately 200 operators across all branches may be in situations similar to yours. How did you arrive at that figure? Nicole glanced at Mendez, who gave a slight nod. This was acceptable to discuss. Ma'am, General Reeves provided that estimate based on preliminary data from informal networks of injured operators. I'm part of one such network coordinated by Captain Lisa Santos. These networks formed because soldiers with combat injuries and ongoing capability found themselves isolated and facing skepticism without institutional support. We share information about successful accommodation strategies, medical retention procedures, and how to navigate systems that aren't designed for our situations. These networks exist outside official channels? Yes, ma'am. They exist because official channels failed. When a soldier with an amputation is being medically separated despite demonstrating that prosthetics enable full performance, where do they turn? When a soldier with PTSD is being dismissed for honesty about symptoms despite perfect duty performance, who advocates for them? When the system says you can't be both injured and excellent, soldiers create their own systems. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. What would an ideal policy look like in your view? This was the opportunity Mendez had prepped her for. The chance to articulate specific recommendations rather than just critique. First, establish clear criteria for when injury prevents service versus when it requires accommodation. Those criteria should be based on performance outcomes, not medical diagnosis. If a soldier with a TBI can pass all required qualifications and perform duties effectively, the TBI is managed, not disqualifying. Second, create standardized accommodation protocols that commanders can implement without excessive bureaucracy. Right now, every accommodation request is treated as a special case requiring multiple levels of approval. That delay often means soldiers push through symptoms until they have a crisis that could have been prevented with timely accommodation. Third, mandatory training for commanders on invisible injuries. Most of the skepticism I've faced comes from commanders who don't understand that TBI can be severe without being visible, that PTSD doesn't always present the way movies depict it, that chronic pain doesn't mean a soldier is weak or lazy. Fourth, protection for soldiers who request accommodation. Right now, asking for help is seen as admission of weakness that can derail your career. We need explicit policy that requesting and receiving accommodation cannot be used as evidence of unsuitability for service or promotion. Finally, tracking and accountability. Commanders who consistently deny reasonable accommodation requests or who create hostile environments for injured soldiers should face professional consequences. Right now, there's no mechanism to identify commanders whose bias is causing retention problems. The panel members exchanged glances. Lieutenant General Torres spoke carefully. These recommendations would require significant policy changes and resource allocation. Yes, ma'am, they would. But the alternative is continuing to lose trained, experienced, capable personnel because we can't accommodate the reality that modern warfare creates injuries that don't fit our historical frameworks. Every soldier the military discards because of treatable, manageable conditions represents years of training investment, operational experience, and institutional knowledge walking out the door. The testimony continued for another hour, covering topics from VA coordination with active duty medical systems to the specific challenges women veterans faced. Nicole answered every question as directly as possible, refusing to soften harsh truths to make the panel more comfortable. When it finally ended, Lieutenant General Torres thanked her formally and indicated the panel would take her testimony under advisement. It was bureaucratic language that promised nothing concrete, but Mendez seemed satisfied as they left the Pentagon. You did well. You gave them everything they need to justify policy changes. Whether they act on it depends on factors beyond our control, but you created a record that can't be ignored. How long until we know if anything changes? Could be months, could be years. Policy change moves slowly in the military, but you've started something, Sergeant Hayes. That matters even if you don't see immediate results. 3 months after the Pentagon testimony, Nicole received an encrypted email from Captain Lisa Santos. Network has grown to 340 operators. Your testimony was leaked, not by us, and circulated widely. Injured soldiers across all branches are reaching out. We need infrastructure. Are you willing to help build it? Nicole stared at the message for a long time. She'd agreed to testify because it might help others, but building infrastructure meant committing to advocacy work beyond her Army duties, meant becoming a public face for injured operators, meant accepting responsibility she wasn't sure she wanted. She called Dr. Morgan, her therapist, to talk through the decision. What does building infrastructure mean practically? Morgan asked. Creating formal support systems, connecting injured operators with resources, advocating for policy changes, potentially establishing a non-profit organization if we can get funding. That's a significant commitment. How would it affect your recovery? Nicole had been thinking about this. It might be part of my recovery. I've spent 4 years focused on proving I'm still capable despite injury. Maybe the next phase is helping others prove the same thing. That's a mature reframing. But I want you to be honest about capacity. You're managing a demanding teaching role, ongoing medical treatment, research participation with Dr. Wu, and the normal stress of military service. Adding advocacy work could overwhelm your ability to maintain balance. I know, but 340 people, Dr. Morgan. That's 340 soldiers dealing with what I've dealt with. Some of them don't have a General Reeves to intervene. Some of them don't have the performance documentation I have. Some of them will be forced out because they don't have support. And you feel responsible for them. Nicole paused. Not responsible for, but responsible to. I've been given opportunities and platforms that most injured operators don't get. Using those opportunities to help others isn't burden, it's purpose. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Purpose is good. Just make sure purpose doesn't become martyrdom. You're allowed to have limits. Nicole agreed to help Santos build infrastructure, but with explicit boundaries. She'd commit 10 hours per week maximum. She'd focus on areas where her experience was most valuable, navigating medical retention processes, connecting operators with resources, and she'd step back if the work compromised her own health. The network decided to formalize as a nonprofit organization called Phantom Support Network, the name chosen to honor operators whose service and sacrifice remained invisible to most of the world. Nicole became a board member alongside Santos, Torres, and 3 other injured operators from different branches and specializations. Funding came from unexpected sources. An anonymous donation of $50,000 appeared within a week of filing incorporation paperwork. Nicole suspected General Reeves but couldn't confirm. Several veterans organizations provided grants. Most significantly, Dr. Jennifer Wu's research had attracted interest from the Department of Veterans Affairs, which provided a substantial grant to expand her work studying adaptation strategies among injured operators, with the Phantom Support Network as a partner organization. The network's mission was straightforward: provide peer support for injured operators navigating medical retention processes, advocate for policy changes that recognized injury and capability as compatible rather than contradictory, and document success stories that challenged institutional assumptions about what recovered service members could accomplish. Within 6 months, the network had helped 47 operators, Nicole noted the number with painful irony, successfully navigate medical retention reviews. 12 had been approved for continued service with accommodations. 23 had received improved disability ratings that better reflected their conditions. 8 had been connected with specialized medical care that significantly improved their quality of life. 4 had been prevented from suicide through crisis intervention and peer support. The work was exhausting and emotionally heavy. Nicole heard stories of institutional betrayal that made her own experiences seem mild. She talked soldiers through panic attacks and medical board preparations. She reviewed documentation and connected people with attorneys who could advocate effectively. But she also saw victories. A Navy EOD technician with an amputation was approved to return to operational status. An Air Force combat controller with severe PTSD found a therapist who understood his specific trauma. A Marine with a traumatic brain injury similar to Nicole's won her medical retention review and was promoted to staff sergeant. These victories sustained Nicole through the difficult work. Each success felt like validation not just of individual capability, but of the network's fundamental premise, that the military could be better if enough people refused to accept the status quo. The Phantom Support Network's 10th month of operation brought its first major crisis. A soldier the network had been supporting, a ranger named Sarah Mitchell with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury, died by suicide. Nicole received the news via text from Captain Santos at 0300. Sarah Mitchell is gone. She shot herself last night. Note mentioned the network and thanked us but said she couldn't fight anymore. I'm devastated. Nicole sat in bed staring at her phone, feeling the weight of failure settle over her like a physical thing. She'd talked with Sarah twice in the past month. Sarah had seemed stable, getting treatment, making progress on her medical retention case, hopeful about outcomes. Nicole had missed the signs, or maybe there had been no signs to miss. Maybe Sarah had simply reached the end of her capacity to endure a system that viewed her injury as disqualification rather than challenge to be accommodated. Nicole didn't go back to sleep. She drove to the office space the network had rented and sat alone in the dark, wondering if this work was helping anyone or if she was just witnessing other people's destruction without the power to prevent it. At 0700, Captain Santos arrived. They sat together without speaking for several minutes. I keep thinking about what else we could have done, Santos finally said. There might not have been anything else. Nicole's voice was hollow. Sarah was fighting a system designed to break people like her. We gave her tools and support, but we couldn't change the fundamental reality that her medical board was going to separate her despite excellent performance reviews. So we failed her. The system failed her. We were just insufficient as a countermeasure. They sat with that truth until other board members arrived. The group spent the day contacting the 18 soldiers Sarah had been closest with in the network, making sure everyone had support, discussing whether the network needed better crisis intervention protocols. Dr. Morgan, when Nicole met with her that evening, was direct. This is the risk of advocacy work. You can't save everyone. Sarah's death is not your responsibility. Then whose responsibility is it? The system that created impossible conditions. The medical board that couldn't recognize her capability. The commanders who treated her PTSD as character failure. The broader culture that stigmatizes mental health treatment. Morgan paused. And Sarah's. Ultimately, she made a decision in a moment of unbearable pain. You couldn't have prevented that by being more available or more supportive. Sometimes people are simply in too much pain to continue. I feel like I should have seen it coming. Suicide is often invisible to the people closest to the person. The fact that Sarah thanked the network in her note suggests you provided meaningful support during her life. That support didn't prevent her death, but it mattered while she was alive. The network held a memorial service for Sarah attended by 40 injured operators from across the country. General Reeves sent a letter recognizing Sarah's service and noting that her death represented a systemic failure that policymakers should take seriously. But Nicole knew the letter, like the testimony, like all the advocacy work, wouldn't bring Sarah back. And it might not prevent the next suicide, or the one after that. The work suddenly felt much heavier. Nicole stood in front of 200 soldiers at a leadership seminar at Fort Benning, wearing her dress uniform with its increasingly crowded display of ribbons and badges. The Silver Star was prominent, but it was accompanied now by the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, and various campaign and service medals that told the story of a career that continued despite predictions it would end. She was here to speak about leadership during crisis, about managing teams under extreme stress, about the invisible wounds of war. The invitation had come from the infantry school's commandant, who'd read the Army Times article and decided Nicole's perspective was valuable for developing leaders. Leadership isn't about being perfect, Nicole told the audience. It's about being functional despite imperfection. I manage a traumatic brain injury every day. Some days I manage it well. Some days I barely manage at all. But I show up, I execute my duties, and I take care of my soldiers. That's not heroic. It's baseline professional behavior. The fact that it seems remarkable reveals how poorly we prepare leaders to understand that injury and effectiveness can coexist. She spoke for 45 minutes, covering topics from decision-making under cognitive impairment to creating inclusive environments for soldiers with invisible injuries. The questions afterward were intelligent and engaged. One major asked, "How do you balance accommodation for injured soldiers with maintaining standards?" Nicole had answered this question dozens of times now, and her response had been refined through repetition. Accommodation doesn't lower standards. It enables meeting standards despite challenges. If a soldier with a prosthetic limb can pass the ACFT and perform their duties effectively, the prosthetic is accommodation, not lowered standards. Same principle applies to cognitive injuries, mental health conditions, chronic pain. The question isn't whether we accommodate, it's whether we're smart enough to recognize that accommodation enables capability rather than replacing it. After the seminar, a young lieutenant approached her privately. "Ma'am, I have PTSD from my deployment. I'm terrified to tell my commander because I think it will end my career. Did you ever feel that way?" "Every day for the first 2 years after my diagnosis. I hid symptoms, refused accommodation, pushed through pain because I thought admitting struggle was admitting weakness." Nicole met the lieutenant's eyes. "That nearly destroyed me. The truth is, getting treatment and requesting accommodation probably saved my career. The commanders who matter, the ones worth serving under, will respect honesty about limitations more than they'll respect suffering in silence. What if my commander isn't one of those? Then document everything, connect with advocacy resources like the Phantom Support Network, and be prepared to fight. It shouldn't be that way, but sometimes it is. You're not alone in that fight." The lieutenant left looking both worried and slightly relieved. Nicole wondered if she'd helped or just confirmed his fears about an institution that still struggled to support injured soldiers effectively. The Phantom Support Network had grown to serve over 800 injured operators. Policy changes Nicole had advocated for in her Pentagon testimony had been partially implemented. New guidelines required commanders to justify denials of accommodation requests, and medical boards now had to consider performance outcomes alongside diagnostic criteria. The changes were incremental, insufficient, but real. Soldiers were being retained who would have been separated 3 years earlier. Commanders were receiving training on invisible injuries. The binary of fit or unfit was slowly being replaced by a spectrum that recognized varying levels of capability and accommodation need. But progress was slow, and resistance remained strong. Nicole still heard stories of injured soldiers facing skepticism and bias. Sarah Mitchell's death had been followed by 6 more suicides among network members, each one a reminder that advocacy work couldn't solve the fundamental problem that war broke people, and institutions often lacked the capacity or will to help them heal. Dr. Wu's research had been published in multiple medical journals and was being used to develop new rehabilitation protocols for injured operators. Nicole had participated in follow-up studies, her brain scans and cognitive testing providing data about how neural adaptation enabled continued high-level performance despite structural damage. "You're literally rewriting how we understand brain injury recovery," Wu had told her during their last research session. "Your brain has created new pathways around damaged areas. It's not healing, it's reorganizing. That's a fundamentally different model than traditional recovery frameworks." Nicole had found that description fitting. She wasn't recovered, she was reorganized. Her life had reorganized around her injury, and that reorganization had created something functional, if not perfect. Her relationship with Jake, the ranger she'd started dating a year earlier, had similarly reorganized. He'd learned to recognize when she needed space versus support, when her silence meant she was managing symptoms versus when it meant she needed intervention. They'd developed systems. She texted him a number from 1 to 10, indicating her symptom severity. He adjusted accordingly. Neither of them pretended the injury didn't exist or that it didn't affect their relationship. "I don't need you to be perfect," Jake had said during a conversation about their future. "I need you to be honest about what you're dealing with and let me help when help is useful." It was the healthiest relationship Nicole had ever had, precisely because it was built on honesty about limitation rather than performance of capability she didn't always possess. 2 years and 3 months after her Pentagon testimony, Nicole received a summons to testify before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. The committee was investigating gaps in mental health care for veterans and wanted Nicole's perspective on how military medical systems prepared or failed to prepare soldiers for the transition to VA care. Captain Mendez, still serving as Nicole's attorney, prepared her extensively. "This is more political than the DoD panel. Members of Congress have various agendas. Some genuinely want to improve veteran care. Others want sound bites for their districts. Be prepared for questions that have nothing to do with your testimony and everything to do with their re-election campaigns." The hearing room was larger and more formal than the Pentagon conference room. Cameras lined the back wall. This testimony would be public record, broadcast on C-SPAN, potentially covered by news outlets. Nicole wore her dress uniform again, the silver star gleaming under the committee room lights. She was one of 5 witnesses scheduled to testify that day, the only active duty service member among them. Representative James Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, Nicole verified, chaired the committee. His opening remarks acknowledged that the military to VA transition was failing many veterans, particularly those with combat-related mental health conditions. Nicole's prepared testimony was similar to her Pentagon statement, but focused more explicitly on systemic gaps. "The military trained me to operate in high-stress environments, to make life or death decisions in seconds, to lead teams under fire. But when I sustained a brain injury and developed PTSD, the military had no framework for supporting operators who remained capable but needed accommodation. I was fortunate enough to receive command support from exceptional leaders. Most soldiers aren't. They're pushed out of service and into a VA system that's overwhelmed, under-resourced, and often unable to provide timely, specialized care for combat injuries." She detailed her experience: the 8-month wait for her first VA mental health appointment, the civilian therapist who didn't understand military culture, the bureaucratic nightmare of filing for disability benefits, the way classification of her service made it nearly impossible to access appropriate care without violating operational security. "I eventually found effective treatment and support, but I had advantages most veterans don't. I was still on active duty with access to military medical facilities. I had advocates fighting for me. I had skills and recognition that gave me credibility when I said I needed help. Veterans without those advantages often fall through the cracks between military and VA systems. Some of them die waiting for care that should have been readily available." The committee members asked predictable questions about wait times, treatment quality, and resource allocation. Nicole answered factually, supporting her observations with data from the Phantom Support Network's experience, serving 800 injured operators. Then Representative Susan Chen, a freshman congresswoman from California who'd campaigned on veterans' issues, asked a different kind of question. "Sergeant Hayes, you've described a system that fails injured service members consistently, but you've also succeeded despite that system. What would you tell young women considering military service about whether they can trust the institution to take care of them if they're injured?" Nicole paused, choosing her words carefully. "Ma'am, I tell them that military service is meaningful and valuable, but they should go in with clear eyes about institutional limitations. The military will train them to extraordinary levels of capability. It will ask them to take risks and make sacrifices that most people can't imagine. And if they're injured in the process of that service, the institution's support will be inconsistent at best. Some commanders will fight for them. Others will see injury as inconvenience or evidence of weakness. Some medical providers will understand their conditions. Others will dismiss symptoms or attribute them to character flaws. The VA will provide some resources but will also create bureaucratic obstacles that can be nearly impossible to navigate alone. That's not a reason not to serve, but it's a reason to build support networks, to document everything, to advocate for yourself relentlessly, and to never assume that institutional loyalty flows both ways. The military will ask for everything you have. It will not necessarily give you everything you need in return. Understanding that reality is part of informed consent to military service. The frankness seemed to surprise the committee. Representative Chen followed up. That's a fairly harsh assessment of an institution you continue to serve. It's an honest assessment. I love the military. I believe in its mission. I'm proud of my service. And I'm also clear-eyed about its failures. Those two realities coexist. Pretending the institution is perfect serves no one. It just means the next generation of service members will be blindsided by problems we could have warned them about. The testimony concluded after 3 hours. Nicole left the Capitol feeling drained but satisfied that she'd spoken truth to power in a way that might actually influence policy. Captain Mendez was pleased. Several committee members approached me afterward asking for written recommendations on specific policy changes. Your testimony gave them political cover to push for reforms they've been hesitant to champion. Will anything actually change? Some things, yes. Congressional attention often drives resource allocation and policy adjustment. Will it fix everything? No, but it moves the needle. Moving the needle had become Nicole's standard for success. Not solving problems entirely, but making them slightly less terrible for the next person facing them. Nicole's promotion to Sergeant First Class came 3 years after the Silver Star ceremony. The promotion board had reviewed her teaching outcomes, leadership evaluations, and continued high-level performance despite medical challenges. Colonel Hartwell, now a brigade commander, had written her evaluation. SFC Hayes represents the future of military leadership. Adaptive, honest about limitations, exceptional despite challenges. Promote immediately and assign to positions where her experience developing injured operators can benefit the force. The promotion meant a new assignment, senior instructor at the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, where she'd train future leaders across the Army. It also meant more responsibility for the Phantom Support Network, which had formalized its relationship with the Army through a pilot program allowing active duty participation in veteran advocacy organizations. Nicole's first day at the NCO Academy brought an unexpected encounter. A young Sergeant First Class approached her during a break between classes. A woman in her late 20s with the look of someone carrying heavy weight. "Ma'am, I'm SFC Jennifer Torres. I was at your congressional testimony. I watched it online." Nicole recognized the name. Torres had reached out to the Phantom Support Network 6 months earlier, describing symptoms of TBI and PTSD following a deployment to Syria. The network had connected her with resources, but Nicole hadn't realized Torres was assigned to Fort Campbell. "How are you doing?" Nicole asked, not as an instructor, but as someone who understood the specific struggles Torres faced. "Some days better than others. My commander is supportive, but I'm terrified that asking for accommodation will derail my career. Watching you succeed despite your injury helps, but..." Torres's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not you. I don't have a Silver Star or general officers advocating for me. I'm just a regular sergeant trying not to fall apart." Nicole felt the familiar ache of recognition, the imposter syndrome, the fear that her success was exceptional rather than replicable, the pressure to be perfect because any failure would be attributed to injury rather than normal human limitation. "Come to my office after duty hours. We need to talk properly." That evening, Nicole and Torres sat in the small office Nicole had been assigned, drinking bad coffee and talking about the reality of managing combat injuries while maintaining military careers. "The thing about advocacy work," Nicole explained, "is that it creates this narrative where I'm the success story, the person who overcame obstacles and proved the system wrong. That's partially true, but it's also incomplete. I have advantages you mentioned. High-level support, public recognition, documentation of capability that's hard to dismiss. Most soldiers don't have those advantages. But here's what's also true. My success isn't because I'm special. It's because I got support at critical moments and I developed strategies for managing symptoms that enable function despite impairment. Those strategies can be learned. The support can be built, even if it's not automatic. You're not me, but you don't need to be. You need to be the best version of yourself that accounts for your reality. They talked for 2 hours. Nicole shared specific adaptation techniques, how to read your body's warning signs before symptoms became debilitating, how to communicate accommodation needs to commanders in ways that emphasized capability rather than limitation, how to build informal support networks when formal systems failed. By the end of the conversation, Torres looked less defeated and more determined. Will you mentor me? Officially? Nicole hadn't planned to take on formal mentees, but she also recognized that this was exactly the kind of direct impact she could have. Yes, but mentorship means honesty, including when you're struggling. Deal? Deal. Over the following months, Nicole mentored Torres through medical board preparations, accommodation requests, and the daily challenges of managing invisible injuries while performing demanding duties. Torres gradually improved, not because she healed, but because she developed the systems and support structures that enabled sustainable function. The mentorship also revealed something Nicole hadn't fully articulated before, that her value wasn't just in her individual performance, but in her ability to help others develop their own pathways to continued service. She wasn't just an exceptional operator who happened to have a brain injury. She was someone who understood the complexity of that experience and could translate it into guidance for others facing similar challenges. 4 years after the Silver Star ceremony, Captain Morrison, now Major Morrison, reassigned to a staff position at division headquarters, requested a meeting with Nicole. The request came through official channels, formal and distant. Nicole hadn't spoken with Morrison since his relief from command. She'd heard he'd completed his bachelor's degree, been promoted on schedule, and was serving competently, if not exceptionally, in his current role. She agreed to meet, curious about what Morrison could possibly want after 4 years of silence. They met at a neutral location, a conference room in the division headquarters, no audience, no formal agenda. Morrison looked older, more worn, though only 4 years had passed. Sergeant First Class Hayes, thank you for agreeing to meet. Morrison's voice carried none of the condescension Nicole remembered from their early interactions. Major Morrison. Awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Morrison spoke. I've been thinking about whether to have this conversation for 2 years. My therapist... He paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. My therapist said I needed to do this for my own processing. So here goes. I was wrong about you. Comprehensively, fundamentally wrong. I saw your medical profile and your classified record and decided they couldn't both be true. I convinced myself you were either exaggerating your injury or fabricating your service record. That conviction made me treat you in ways that were professionally inappropriate and personally cruel. Nicole absorbed this, surprised by the directness. She'd expected defensiveness or justification, not accountability. Morrison continued, I want to explain why, though explanation isn't excuse. I was under intense pressure. My previous unit had the worst readiness scores in the brigade. My commander made it clear that I was on thin ice professionally. When you were assigned as my instructor, I saw your medical profile and thought, here's my scapegoat. If training outcomes are poor, I can blame the injured instructor with the questionable record. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. I was so focused on protecting my own career that I was willing to destroy yours. Morrison met her eyes. The Silver Star ceremony forced me to confront that I'd been torturing a genuine war hero because I was insecure about my own capabilities. That realization broke something in me. I started therapy shortly after. Spent a year unpacking my own issues. The pressure I felt to be perfect, the way I'd learned to view any weakness as disqualifying, the institutional culture that rewarded hiding struggle and punished honesty about limitation. None of that excuses what I did to you, but it explains the mindset that made it possible. Nicole processed this carefully. Part of her wanted to simply accept the apology and move on. Another part wanted Morrison to fully understand the damage he'd caused. Major Morrison, do you understand what those months under your command cost me? Not just professionally, but personally? I think I do, but I'd like to hear it from you. I developed suicidal ideation for the first time in my life. Not because of my injury, I'd managed that for years, but because the institutional environment you created made me feel like my service meant nothing, like my capabilities were worthless, like I was fundamentally broken and unwanted. I sat in my apartment with my service pistol loaded, trying to decide if continuing to fight was worth the pain. The only reason I didn't pull that trigger was because my brother called at exactly the right moment and stayed on the phone until I'd secured the weapon and contacted Dr. Morgan. You almost killed me, Major Morrison. Not with direct action, but with systematic degradation of my sense of worth. Morrison's face had gone pale. I didn't know. I'm sorry. That's inadequate, but I don't know what else to say. You don't need to say anything else, but you need to understand that I was under pressure. Doesn't excuse creating conditions that nearly drive someone to suicide. Leaders face pressure. Real leaders don't respond to that pressure by destroying the people under their command. You're right. Absolutely right. Morrison paused. For what it's worth, that realization changed how I lead now. I watch for signs of struggle in my soldiers. I ask about mental health proactively. I approve accommodation requests without making soldiers feel weak for asking. I'm trying to be the leader I should have been for you. That's good. It doesn't undo the damage, but it prevents future damage. That matters. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Morrison asked, "Can you forgive me?" Nicole considered this. Forgiveness wasn't something she'd thought much about. She'd been too focused on survival and advocacy to process her feelings about the specific people who'd harmed her. I don't know if I forgive you, Major Morrison, but I don't carry active anger toward you anymore. You were a symptom of a broken system, not the cause of it. The system that told you hiding weakness was more important than honest leadership, that told you injured soldiers couldn't be excellent, that created conditions where your career insecurity could become my existential threat. That's what needs to change. You've changed yourself, which is valuable, but one transformed leader doesn't fix institutional culture. That requires sustained effort by many people over long periods. Morrison nodded slowly. I'm trying to be part of that effort now. I teach a class on inclusive leadership at the Captain's Career Course. I talk about my failure with you as a case study and how bias can blind leaders to capability. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. That's more than most people do. Keep doing it. They concluded the meeting cordially, if not warmly. Nicole left feeling something between closure and unresolved tension. Morrison had apologized, taken accountability, changed his behavior. But he couldn't give her back the year she'd lost to his bias. Couldn't erase the suicidal ideation or the institutional trauma. Some wounds don't fully heal, Nicole reflected. They just become part of your history that you learn to carry. 5 years after the Silver Star ceremony, Nicole stood in Walter Reed National Military Medical Center's auditorium, addressing a packed room of military medical providers, VA administrators, and wounded service members. She'd been invited to speak at a conference on traumatic brain injury treatment and recovery, not as a patient, but as an expert on adaptation strategies. Dr. Jennifer Wu introduced her. Sergeant First Class Nicole Hayes represents a paradigm shift in how we understand brain injury recovery. Traditional models focused on restoration of function, trying to get the brain back to pre-injury state. Nicole's case demonstrates that adaptation, reorganizing function around permanent damage, can enable high-level performance that looks different from pre-injury capability, but achieves equivalent or superior outcomes. Her brain scans show significant structural damage that should, according to conventional models, prevent the kind of precision work she performs. But her neural imaging also shows remarkable plasticity, new pathways compensating for damaged areas, different regions taking over functions they don't typically handle, the brain literally rewiring itself to maintain capability. What makes Nicole's case especially valuable is that she's documented her adaptation strategies systematically. Other injured operators can learn from her approach, potentially accelerating their own recovery processes. Nicole took the podium feeling the familiar nervousness of public speaking combined with the responsibility of representing not just herself, but the 800-plus operators the Phantom Support Network now served. I'm going to start with an uncomfortable truth, she began. I'm not recovered. 5 years after my injury, I still have daily symptoms. Migraines, photosensitivity, occasional tremors, periods where my cognitive function is noticeably impaired. I manage these symptoms through medication, accommodation, and strategies I've developed through trial and error. The question isn't whether I'm healed, I'm not. The question is whether I'm functional, and the answer depends on how you define functional. If functional means performing exactly as I did before my injury, then no. If functional means accomplishing mission requirements and maintaining professional standards despite ongoing challenges, then yes. The adaptation strategies I've developed aren't magic. They're systematic responses to specific limitations. For photosensitivity, I use amber-tinted glasses and request modified lighting when possible. For cognitive fatigue, I schedule demanding tasks during my peak performance hours and build in recovery time. For migraines, I've identified triggers and developed abortive protocols that minimize impact on my work. These accommodations don't make me less capable. They make my capabilities sustainable. Without them, I'd burn out trying to push through symptoms. With them, I maintain consistent high-level performance. She spoke for 40 minutes, detailing specific adaptation techniques, showing neuroimaging that illustrated her brain's reorganization, and addressing the psychological challenges of accepting permanent change rather than expecting complete recovery. The question and answer session was extensive. Medical providers wanted technical details about her treatment protocols. VA administrators asked about how her strategies could be scaled to help other veterans. Wounded service members wanted hope that their lives weren't over. One Army specialist, a young woman with visible scarring and the hesitant demeanor of someone still adjusting to catastrophic injury, asked, "Ma'am, how did you stop hating yourself for being broken?" The question hit Nicole hard. It was so direct, so vulnerable, so familiar from her own early recovery. "I haven't stopped completely," Nicole answered honestly. "There are still days when I look at the person I was before my injury and mourn that loss. But I've learned to separate grief about what I've lost from judgment about what I am now. I'm not broken. I'm changed. Those are different things." The key shift for me was recognizing that my value isn't determined by my capabilities relative to some imagined perfect version of myself. It's determined by what I actually contribute given my actual reality. I teach soldiers to shoot. I mentor injured operators. I advocate for policy changes. That's meaningful work accomplished by a person with a brain injury, not despite it, but inclusive of it. The specialist nodded, eyes glistening with tears she was clearly trying to suppress. After the conference, Nicole was approached by a Navy commander she didn't recognize. "Ma'am, I'm Commander Jessica Ramirez. I'm starting a new program at the Naval Special Warfare Center focused on retention and adaptation for injured operators. Would you be willing to consult on curriculum development?" Nicole had gotten used to these requests. Her expertise was in demand across all branches now. What would consultation involve? Helping us develop training materials for both injured operators and the medical providers and commanders who support them. Your perspective on what works and what doesn't would be invaluable. I'm interested, but I need to check with my chain of command about time allocation. I'm already committed to the Phantom Support Network and my teaching duties. Understood. I'll coordinate with your commander. This is too important not to pursue. As Nicole left Walter Reed, she reflected on the strangeness of her current position. 5 years ago, she'd been fighting for basic recognition of her capabilities. Now she was being sought as an expert, her experience valued not despite her injury, but because of the insights it provided into adaptation and resilience. The irony wasn't lost on her. The thing that had nearly ended her career had become the foundation of a new kind of contribution to military service. 6 years after Operation Phantom Cord, Nicole received an unexpected email with subject line, "From one of the 47. The message was from a man named Ahmad Khalil, a former interpreter who'd been among the high-value targets extracted during the operation that earned Nicole her Silver Star. He was now living in the United States, having been granted special immigration status due to his service supporting American forces. Sergeant Hayes, I hope this message reaches you. I have tried for many years to find the soldiers who saved my family. Someone at the State Department finally told me your name. I understand your operation was classified, but I want you to know what your decision meant. When you chose to disarm that IED instead of detonating it remotely, you knew it put your team at risk. I was in the building. I heard your team discussing the options. I heard someone, I now know it was you, say, "We can get them all out if I can cut the right wires." I'm taking the shot. My wife was pregnant. My daughters were 7 and 4. My mother was elderly and sick. None of them would have survived a controlled detonation of a building that close. You saved all of them, but you also saved the 40 people in the adjacent buildings who would have died in the collapse. I cannot change that 2 of your teammates died. I carry that knowledge with grief, but I also carry the knowledge that my youngest daughter, born 3 months after your operation, exists because of your choice. Her name is Nicole. We named her after the soldier who saved her before she was born. The email continued with details about Ahmad's family, their life in the United States, his work as a translator for refugee services. He concluded, I know soldiers like you do not seek recognition, but you should know that 47 people wake up every day because of your courage. We remember, we honor that sacrifice, and we are trying to live lives worthy of the gift you gave us." Nicole read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. For 6 years, the 47 had been an abstract number, a mathematical justification for a terrible choice. But they were people. They had names, lives, children. One of those children was named after her. She showed the email to Dr. Morgan during their next session. "How does this make you feel?" Morgan asked. "Overwhelmed, grateful, still guilty about Doc and Vega, all of it simultaneously." Nicole paused. "For 6 years, I've balanced the equation. 47 saved, 2 lost. I've tried to make peace with that math, but meeting one of the 47, knowing there's a little girl named Nicole who exists because of that night, it makes the equation less abstract and somehow both better and worse. Better and worse how? Better because I can see the tangible impact. It wasn't just numbers, it was actual human lives that continued. But worse because it also makes Doc and Vega's deaths more concrete. They died so Ahmad's pregnant wife could live, so 40 people I'd never meet could keep existing. That's a lot to carry. You've been carrying it for 6 years. This just makes visible what was always true." Nicole arranged to meet Ahmad and his family 2 months later, when she had leave and could travel to their city. The meeting was emotional and difficult and cathartic. Ahmad's daughters hugged her. His wife cried and thanked her in broken English. His mother, who spoke no English, simply held Nicole's hands and looked at her with an intensity that needed no translation. Little Nicole, now 6 years old, was shy but curious. "Papa says you're a soldier," she said in a small voice. "I am. Papa says you saved us." Nicole knelt down to the child's level. "I was part of a team. We all worked together. Are you a hero?" Nicole paused, thinking about how to answer honestly. "I'm a person who had to make a very hard choice. I chose to try to save as many people as possible. Heroes are the people who died making that choice work. I'm just someone who lived." Ahmad's wife, Fatima, spoke up in halting English. "You live. They live in you. You honor them by continuing." It was the most profound thing anyone had said to Nicole about her survival guilt. Doc and Vega didn't just die in the past. They lived on in her continued service, her advocacy work, her mentorship of other injured operators. Their sacrifice enabled not just the immediate survival of 47 people, but everything Nicole had done since. The visit lasted 3 hours. When Nicole left, Ahmad walked her to her rental car. "Sergeant Hayes, I know you carry guilt about your teammates. I cannot take that from you, but I want you to know their death was not waste. It was sacrifice that gave 47 people a future. That includes 12 children who have been born since that night to the people you saved. That includes the people those children will become, the lives they will touch. Your teammates' sacrifice ripples forward through time. Maybe that doesn't ease your pain, but it should ease any doubt about whether their deaths mattered." Nicole drove back to her hotel and cried for an hour, not just grief anymore, but something more complex. Release, maybe, or acceptance that grief and gratitude could coexist, that carrying the weight of impossible choices was itself a form of honoring those choices. 7 years after her Silver Star ceremony, Nicole was selected as the Sergeant Major Academy's Distinguished Visiting Fellow, a rare honor that brought her to Fort Bliss, Texas, for a year to teach future senior enlisted leaders. The position gave her platform to integrate lessons about invisible injuries, adaptive leadership, and inclusive command climate into the Army's senior enlisted education. It also connected her with the next generation of leaders who would determine whether the institutional changes she'd fought for would be sustained or abandoned. One of her students was a master sergeant named Maria Santos, Captain Lisa Santos's younger sister, and herself an injured operator managing PTSD from multiple deployments. "Ma'am, I applied for this program because of you," Maria told Nicole during their first one-on-one counseling session. "My sister talks about how you changed the conversation about injured operators. I want to be part of sustaining that change when I'm in positions of senior leadership." Over the academic year, Nicole watched Maria and 30 other students grapple with complex leadership scenarios that included decisions about injured soldiers, accommodation requests, medical retention boards, and the tension between mission requirements and human limitations. In one seminar, Nicole presented a case study, deliberately disguised but based on her own experience. You have a soldier with exceptional performance record and current TBI symptoms. The soldier's commander recommends medical separation because accommodations are logistically complicated. What do you do? The students debated for 90 minutes. Some argued for retention, citing the soldier's proven capability. Others sided with the commander, suggesting that accommodations indicated the soldier couldn't perform in deployed environments. A few recognized the case study as Nicole's own story and challenged the premise that the commander's recommendation should be given significant weight. Nicole facilitated without revealing her personal stake until the end of the seminar. That case study was mine. I was the soldier. The commander was Captain Morrison, who wanted me gone because my injury made him uncomfortable. If General Reeves hadn't intervened, I would have been medically separated despite being capable of continued high-level performance. The lesson isn't that every injured soldier should be retained. Some injuries genuinely prevent safe service. The lesson is that commander bias is real, that accommodation and capability can coexist, and that senior leaders have a responsibility to look beyond their own assumptions when making decisions that end careers. The impact on the students was visible. Several approached Nicole after class to discuss their own experiences with injured soldiers, their struggles to know when to push for retention versus accept medical separation, their fears about making wrong calls that would either endanger the force or unfairly end careers. This was the work Nicole had come to understand as most critical, not just advocating for policy changes, but shaping the mindsets of leaders who would implement those policies. Regulations could mandate accommodation, but individual leaders determined whether that accommodation was provided with respect or resentment. By the end of the academic year, Nicole had influenced 30 future senior enlisted leaders' understanding of invisible injuries. Those 30 would go on to lead thousands of soldiers, potentially changing how entire units approached accommodation and retention. It was slow work, incremental change, but it mattered. 8 years after her injury, Nicole received devastating news. The Phantom Support Network's largest funding source, the VA grant that had sustained their operations for 3 years, was not being renewed. Budget cuts and shifting priorities meant the program was being eliminated. Without that funding, the network would have to scale back operations by 70%. Captain Santos delivered the news during an emergency board meeting. We can maintain crisis hotline and basic resource connections, but we'll have to eliminate case management, legal support coordination, and our medical provider training programs. We're going to have to tell 800 operators that their support system is being cut. Nicole felt the familiar weight of institutional failure settling over her. They'd built something meaningful, something that had helped hundreds of injured operators stay in service or transition successfully to civilian life, and it was being eliminated because bureaucrats in D.C. decided other programs were higher priority. "Can we fundraise to replace the VA grant?" Maria Santos asked. "We'd need to raise $300,000 annually." Lisa Santos replied, "That's beyond individual donors and veteran organization grants. We'd need corporate sponsors or major philanthropic support." The board spent 3 weeks exploring options. Some corporations were interested, but their support came with strings, publicity requirements that would compromise the confidentiality many network members needed. Philanthropic organizations were sympathetic but already committed to other causes. In the end, the network secured enough funding to maintain reduced operations, crisis hotline, online peer support forums, and a small grants program for emergency assistance. But the comprehensive support system they'd built was gone. Nicole had to call injured operators personally to inform them of the service reductions. Each call was difficult. Some soldiers understood that advocacy organizations operated on fragile funding. Others felt betrayed, abandoned by yet another system that had promised support and failed to deliver. One call particularly devastated Nicole. A young Army specialist named David Chen, one of Torres's mentees, asked simply, "Ma'am, what do I do now? You were my lifeline. I don't have anyone else who understands." Nicole connected Chen with the resources that remained, gave him her personal contact information for emergencies, and felt absolutely inadequate. She'd helped build a system that had functioned for 3 years and then been dismantled by budget decisions she couldn't control. In her session with Dr. Morgan, Nicole processed the complex emotions. "I thought we'd created something sustainable. I thought if we demonstrated value, if we showed outcomes, if we proved the network saved lives, I thought that would be enough to keep it funded. I was wrong. You weren't wrong that the network had value. You were wrong that value automatically translates to sustained institutional support. Those are different things. So we just accept that 800 people will have less support because bureaucrats decided other programs matter more?" You accept that you did everything within your power and that some failures are systemic rather than personal. The network helped hundreds of people during its peak operation. That impact doesn't disappear because funding was cut. The operators you helped are still helped. The lives you saved are still saved. Nicole knew Morgan was right intellectually, but emotionally she felt the weight of failure. She'd become the face of successful adaptation, the soldier whose advocacy changed policies and helped others. But she couldn't overcome budget realities or force institutions to prioritize injured operators when other needs competed for limited resources. This was the limit of individual advocacy. You could change minds, influence policies, build systems, but you couldn't control the broader institutional forces that determined which systems survived and which were sacrificed to budget constraints. 10 years after Operation Phantom Cord, Nicole stood in Arlington National Cemetery visiting the graves of Doc and Vega. She made this pilgrimage annually now, her way of honoring the teammates who died while she lived. She'd brought something special this year, a letter from Ahmad's daughter, the 6-year-old Nicole who'd been named after her. The child had written in careful handwriting, "Dear Soldier Nicole, thank you for saving my family. When I grow up, I want to help people like you helped us. Love, Nicole." Nicole placed the letter at Doc's headstone. Her name is Nicole. One of the 47 has a daughter named Nicole. I thought you should know that your sacrifice has a name and a face and a future. It's not enough. Nothing is enough, but it's something. She sat between the two graves for an hour, not praying exactly. She'd never been particularly religious, but communing with the memory of men who'd trusted her judgment, even when that judgment led to their deaths. 10 years had given her perspective, but not peace. She'd accomplished things Doc and Vega would never accomplish. She'd mentored soldiers, changed policies, built support systems. She'd lived a decade they hadn't gotten. That guilt remained, but it had been joined by determination that their sacrifice meant something beyond the immediate survival of 47 people. After leaving Arlington, Nicole drove to Walter Reed, where she was scheduled to speak at a TBI support group. The group consisted of 12 active duty service members, various ages and ranks, all managing combat-related brain injuries. One soldier, a young private first class who looked barely 20, asked the question Nicole had heard dozens of times. "Ma'am, does it get better?" Nicole had learned to answer this honestly. It gets different. Some symptoms improve, others become chronic. You learn adaptation strategies that make function possible. You find meaning in different ways than you expected. Whether that's better depends on your definition. What I can tell you is that brain injury doesn't mean your life is over. It means your life is different. I've had a meaningful career, meaningful relationships, meaningful impact on the world despite, and sometimes because of, my injury. That's not the life I planned when I joined the Army, but it's a life worth living. The group continued for 90 minutes. Soldiers shared struggles and strategies, frustrations and small victories. Nicole mostly listened, offering perspective when asked, but mostly creating space for people to process their experiences with others who understood. This work, sitting with injured soldiers, bearing witness to their pain, offering the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd walked this path before them. This felt like the truest form of honoring Doc and Vega's sacrifice. They'd died so others could live. Nicole lived in a way that helped others survive their own versions of impossible circumstances. After the group concluded, the young private approached her privately. "Ma'am, I was going to kill myself last week. I had the plan and everything. Then my therapist told me about you, about a soldier who has a brain injury worse than mine but still teaches and leads and matters. That made me think maybe I could keep trying." Nicole felt the familiar ache of responsibility mixed with humility. "I'm glad you're still here. And I want you to know, the fact that I'm functional doesn't mean your struggle isn't real or valid. Brain injuries affect everyone differently. You're not failing by finding this hard, but you make it look manageable, because you see me on my good days, in controlled environments, after years of practice managing symptoms. You don't see me on the days I can't get out of bed because the migraines are too severe. You don't see the panic attacks or the moments I forget words mid-sentence or the times I have to leave social situations because sensory overload is overwhelming. Those parts of my life are real too. I just don't perform them publicly." The private absorbed this, seeming to find relief in Nicole's honesty about ongoing struggle. "So you're not cured. I'm adapted. Adapted means functional despite ongoing challenges. It's the best I can offer. Proof that you can be injured and still matter, still contribute, still have a life worth living. 12 years after her Silver Star ceremony, Nicole retired from active duty as a Master Sergeant with 20 years of service. The retirement ceremony was attended by General Reeves, now retired herself, Colonel Hartwell, a Brigadier General, Major Chen, now Lieutenant Colonel Chen, and over 200 soldiers Nicole had taught, mentored, or supported through the Phantom Support Network. The guest speaker was Ahmad Khalil, who'd become a U.S. citizen and now worked as a refugee advocate. He spoke about the ripple effects of Nicole's decision that night in Afghanistan. 47 people survived. Those 47 have had children, 19 so far. Some of those children will have children. The family tree that grows from one soldier's impossible choice will extend through generations. Master Sergeant Hayes will never know all the people who exist because she chose to risk everything to save as many as possible. But I want her to know, the tree is growing. The legacy is living. Nicole's retirement speech was characteristically direct. I didn't plan to be a symbol of anything. I just wanted to serve, to do my job well, to take care of my soldiers. The injury complicated that intention, but it didn't eliminate it. What I learned over 20 years is that excellence isn't perfection. It's showing up imperfectly and doing the best you can with what you have. To the injured operators watching or hearing about this ceremony, your service matters, your struggles are real, and accommodation isn't weakness. To the commanders and leaders, some of your best people are carrying invisible wounds. Creating space for them to serve despite those wounds isn't charity, it's strategic wisdom. To everyone else, the military I'm leaving is better than the one I entered, but it's still not good enough. Keep pushing for change. After the ceremony, Nicole met privately with Jennifer Torres, her first formal mentee, who was now a Sergeant First Class herself and leading the reconstituted Phantom Support Network, reformed after the original funding crisis with a more sustainable model. You know what your real legacy is? Torres asked. It's not the policies you changed or the operators you helped. It's that you made it normal to be broken and functional simultaneously. Before you, those two states seemed contradictory. After you, people understand they can coexist. That's cultural change, not just policy change. Nicole retired to a small house in Oregon, near her brother Marcus and his family. She'd planned for a quiet transition to civilian life, maybe teaching at a community college, maybe just fishing and hiking and processing 20 years of accumulated trauma. But requests kept coming. The Naval Special Warfare Center still wanted her consultation on injured operator adaptation programs. The VA wanted her input on TBI rehabilitation protocols. Universities invited her to speak about military-civilian transition and invisible wounds. The Phantom Support Network needed board guidance. 6 months into retirement, Nicole realized she couldn't fully step away from the work, not because the institution demanded it, but because it had become part of her identity. She wasn't just a former operator with a brain injury. She was someone who understood that experience deeply enough to help others navigate it. She structured her post-military life carefully. 20 hours per week maximum on advocacy and consultation work. 20 hours reserved for personal recovery and joy. 20 hours flexible. She hiked in the Oregon mountains, learning bird calls and plant species. She dated, awkwardly but earnestly. She saw Dr. Morgan weekly, processing not just trauma, but also the strangeness of identity after leaving military service. One afternoon, Nicole received an email from Major Morrison, now Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. Master Sergeant Hayes, I'm teaching a course on ethical leadership at West Point. I use your case as a study in how commander bias can nearly destroy an exceptional soldier. Would you be willing to speak to my students via video conference? Nicole agreed. Speaking to future officers about how not to treat injured soldiers felt like meaningful work. During the video call, a cadet asked, "Ma'am, if you could go back and change anything, would you?" Nicole paused, considering the question seriously. I'd change the system that made my experience as difficult as it was. I'd change the culture that views injury as disqualifying rather than challenging. I'd change the policies that forced injured operators to choose between honesty about limitations and continued service. But would I change my specific path? No, because that path, as painful as it was, taught me things I needed to learn and positioned me to help people I needed to help. Sometimes difficult experiences are necessary rather than regrettable. Even the brain injury. It's shaped me in ways that I value, even though I hate the symptoms and grieve the capabilities I lost. That's complex, but complexity is more honest than simple narratives about overcoming obstacles or being broken by them. 15 years after Operation Phantom Cord, Nicole sat in a cafe in Seattle with David Chen, the young specialist who'd called her years ago asking what to do when the Phantom Support Network lost its funding. Chen was now a successful software engineer who'd medically separated from the Army, but found meaningful civilian life managing his TBI through the strategies Nicole had taught him. "You saved my life," Chen said simply. Not dramatically, no suicide intervention, no crisis moment. Just, "You showed me that life could continue despite injury. That was enough to keep me trying when trying felt impossible." They talked for 2 hours. About Chen's life, Nicole's retirement, the ongoing challenges of managing invisible injuries in a world that valued productivity over sustainability. Before they parted, Chen asked, "Do you ever regret staying in? You could have taken medical retirement years earlier, avoided all the fights with commanders who didn't believe you." Nicole thought about this. "Sometimes I wonder what different paths might have looked like. But regret requires believing another choice would have been better. I don't know that it would have been. I fought to stay because serving meant something to me. The fights were exhausting, sometimes devastating, but they were in service of—" She paused, searching for the right words. "In service of being who I needed to be. I'm at peace with that, even when the path was brutal." Later that week, Nicole received a package from Ahmad's family. Inside was a photo. Little Nicole, now 15 years old, in her high school JROTC uniform. The accompanying letter read, "She wants to serve like the soldier she's named after. We are proud and terrified, but we understand that service runs through this family now because of what you made possible." Nicole placed the photo on her desk next to her silver star, her retirement shadow box, and the worn photograph of Doc and Vega she'd carried for 15 years. These were the anchors of her identity: the impossible choice, the teammates lost, the 47 saved, the next generation carrying forward. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Torres. "New soldier reached out to network. TBI from IED facing skeptical commander. Sound familiar? Could you talk to her?" Nicole smiled slightly. The work was never done. There would always be another injured operator facing institutional skepticism. Another soldier needing to hear that injury and capability could coexist. Another person who needed what Nicole had needed 15 years ago. Someone who'd walked this path and survived to testify that survival was possible. She typed her response. "Send me her contact info. I'll reach out tonight." Because this was her legacy. More than medals or policy changes or public recognition. The quiet work of helping one person at a time navigate impossible circumstances. The fragile hope that individual change, multiplied by enough individuals, eventually became institutional transformation. Nicole looked out her window at the Oregon rain, thinking about Doc and Vega, about the 47, about the 800-plus operators the network had served, about the young soldier she'd talk with tonight, who was just beginning to understand what it meant to be injured and functional simultaneously. The mathematics never changed. 2 lost, 47 saved, countless others touched by the ripple effects of that impossible choice. But the meaning of those numbers evolved. They weren't just a balance sheet of lives traded. They were a reminder that every choice created consequences that echoed forward through time in ways the chooser could never fully comprehend. Nicole picked up her phone and began drafting the message to the new soldier. "I understand what you're going through. It's hard and it's unfair and you're not alone. Let's talk about how to navigate this." 15 years after the worst night of her life, Master Sergeant Nicole Hayes, callsign Phantom, was still fighting, not against enemies in distant countries, but against institutional indifference and cultural misconceptions about what injury meant for capability. It was different work than she'd planned. It was harder in some ways, more personal, more exhausting, because it required constant emotional engagement with others' pain. But it mattered, and in the end, that was enough. The rain continued falling. Nicole sent the message, and somewhere, another injured soldier received the fragile hope that their life might continue, despite the institutional forces arrayed against them. The work was never finished. But for today, for this moment, Nicole had done what she could. That would have to be sufficient.